Good evening. I'd like to call our meeting to order. The governor has suspended certain provisions of the open meeting law during the pandemic. This public meeting shall be seen and heard on Milton Access Television and virtually on Zoom.com. Real-time public comment can be provided on Zoom virtually. The meeting ID and passcode is available on the agenda, which is available on the Planning Department's website. So we could talk about next meetings would be June 24th and July 8th. And let's see. Can everyone see everybody? Is everything working? Just checking. I guess we can start with our staff update.
Denny, in lieu of the size of the agenda tonight, I'm going to yield my time to the rest of the items. Suffice to say, we're very busy and I think we're doing a great job.
I think so too. Okay, thank you for doing that because it is a pretty stacked agenda. Okay, so first thing is citizen speak. Anyone from the public is welcome to come and speak on any topic they would like now. We have topics on our agenda where you will be invited to talk at that time on those topics. But if you want to talk now on anything else or get it out of the way, in case you don't want to stay till midnight, because we might be here that long. So is there, but it's most helpful for us if you do save it for the topic, but we understand. Some people might want to get it out of the way. So do we have anyone for citizen speak? I can't tell on my computer, so Tim.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands up,
Okay.
but if folks want to talk and use the hand raise function, that's how we'll be able to tell. But if there's nobody, I think we can move on.
Okay, all right. So Tim, did you want to do 1431 first or 440 Granite Ave?
So 1431 is the first public hearing that was scheduled for tonight. This is a scenic roads application pursuant to Section 13 of the Planning Board Rules and Regulations, which govern the alteration of stone walls and trees on town land on designated scenic roads, Brush Hill Road being one of them. We did a little bit more of a detailed explanation of this last time, but this is anytime that an applicant wants to alter a stone wall or take down a tree, it requires a public hearing in front of the planning board. Typically, we see these when homeowners or property owners want to cut a new driveway or something like that. And I think this is a very typical scenic road permit. So I'm going to let Ned Corcoran, who is representing the applicant, take it from here and explain the nature of the project.
There I am. Good evening, all. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board. For the record, my name is Ned Corcoran. I'm an attorney here in Milton, and I'm joined by Bill Madden, who is a landscape architect, who is with the Gregory Lombardi Design Group and has done the specific design plans. This is an application filed on behalf of Dusty and Barry Heitinen, who own the property at 1431 Brush Hill Road. It is one of the two lots that corners on Avenue A, which is a private way down the hill and opposite from Fuller Village. I think, Danny, not far from where you are. I'm not sure, Tim, if any of the materials that we've submitted are available to review on this thing, but we did submit a set of plans. It's essentially a very simple application. The stone wall that runs along Brush Hill Road forms the boundary, the property line for the Heitinens on Brush Hill Road. There is a fairly narrow driveway into the property from Brush Hill Road and along the, here we go. So the first slide shows the location of the property. 1431 Brush Hill Road, fairly large property, opposite, as I said, opposite Fuller Village on Brush Hill Road. It does corner on Avenue A, which runs between 1375 and 1431. I know that the board has spent time with other property owners who own property on Avenue A dealing with other issues. This application actually deals with the stone wall that runs along Brush Hill Road, and as I said, forms part of the boundary line of the property on Brush Hill Road. Next slide. The existing condition shows a fairly narrow drive in and out off of Brush Hill Road with a fairly narrow opening of an old stone wall on both sides. And you can see a line of trees that runs along the uphill side, I guess the easterly side of the driveway, that are somewhat at risk for traffic coming in and out. The Heitmans have a desire to improve the stone wall, to sort of relocate the opening by a couple of feet, and then extend the wall into the property on both sides and provide some protection for the trees, as you see there. They'll also be installing a privacy gate. Next slide, please. So the idea is that on the downhill side, the westerly side, they would open the wall by 4 feet. They'll infill approximately 2 feet on the uphill side. And then from there, we'll curve into the property. And you can see there's a tree that's right behind the stone wall on the left side, as I said, that is somewhat in danger. Next slide, please. Here's a plan view of the property, of the wall as it would be improved and extended into the property. And then the next slide would show the gate that would be installed with the stone wall as it faces out from the property. And one last slide shows a detail of the lantern cap. So it's fairly straightforward. Bill and I are available to answer questions that you may have, and we look forward to doing that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Corcoran. I actually did stop by and meet with Bill Madden and the property owner to look at this in advance of the meeting. I can understand why they want to add to, if you were leaving the driveway, they wanted to add approximately a foot or two so that they can see to get out, because there's a tree on the outside of the stone wall that we didn't get to see in these pictures, but this will allow the car to move slightly to the left and be able to see around the tree that's on the right. So it is a safety matter. So that opens that up. The proposed, so then on the other side, they had to take away a little bit of the wall in gray so that the car could move to the left and get around the tree that's, imagine you're coming out. So in addition to that, where the wall is green and they would be adding wall, that helps them move the wall out further away from the row of yew trees. So that is a benefit to the yew trees to go further away from them and actually open up some of the, Bill might be able to tell me, but I think there was some granite stone path there that they would be pulling up, which would be a benefit to the yews. Let's see, they would be extending the walls into the property in a rounded way, which seems softer and safer in entering and exiting the property. And then they are actually talking about redoing some of the stone wall, which is dry, old stones that have sort of crumbled over the years. I mean, it's still a beautiful wall, and it works with this historic property and this historic stretch of the roadway. And it's in my mind, it's a benefit to improve any portion of that wall would be a net benefit for the community. And let's see. Just looking at my notes here.
Denny, if I could just
Yeah.
piggyback on what you were saying.
Sure.
For the board, the client is committed to the stone wall. She's actually a lover of the craft of these historic dry laid stone walls. And so it's very important to her, as well as the design team, to sort of elevate the current stone walls. They're essentially failing in some portions of them. So we want to just refurbish them. We're not going to change the aesthetic at all. So we want to refurbish the stone wall along Brush Hill Road. And then we want to tie in our current design with the historic stone wall as well. So, just to give you a sense of what the design team and the client is interested in. And really the driver for the curb cut change is that we want to create it's a public safety issue with the velocity of vehicles that are moving up and down Brush Hill Road. And when you're entering or exiting the driveway, it's very difficult to see out or to see in different directions. So we want to sort of clarify that. So once we move the drive away from the existing trees, your cone of vision increases significantly. So that's the real sort of marker of why we're trying to do this. So, we see this as a bit of a public safety component, as well as we're a little bit, the client is a tree hugger in a way. So we want to save the yews. And so we make this revision, the environment for the yew trees to have a longer lived life is significant. So we look at this as a win-win for the homeowner as well as for the town.
So thank you. So I guess I will ask the other board members if they have any questions or comments or would like to weigh in this time.
I have
To
a
my,
question.
okay, thanks, Cheryl.
The plan that we see on the screen calls for a 4-foot fence. How does that impact any of the existing trees? And then what material is that fence intended to be?
It'll be a metal fence. We haven't got to that point yet. Cheryl, just like Dusty, you want us to hurry up on the master plan. We're a little behind. But it'll be a metal fence. And, we need to we're trying to provide security for the homeowner because there have been issues of people entering her property. But as you see, it's set back from the stone wall. The interest is to not have the fence be a visual element or experience as you're moving down Brush Hill Road. So we refer to it as sort of the planted sandwich. We're gonna put plants and trees on her side of the fence as well as on the Brush Hill side of the fence. So when you're driving down Brush Hill Road, it'll feel like a wooded, planted condition. But the fence is primarily for privacy.
My only, and I realize this fence is outside the jurisdiction here, but the visual aspects of the scenic roads are something that I think Canton Avenue in particular has experienced a lot of new fences. And I feel as if many of them detract from the aspect of it being a scenic road, because now you can't see into those landscapes, next to the road. And so I would just ask if you would take a drive down Canton Avenue and maybe see what the things that I mentioned I think are concerning, because I think you can design to, have the kind of idea of, you see the landscape, and 4 feet high is not very tall compared to some, but
Correct.
Just the distance away from the stone wall that you located could impact that visual of when you're going down the street. So, but as far as like the idea of having a safer exit and entrance and providing privacy with this, the way the stone wall is, I don't see any objections to that.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback.
Would anyone else on the board have any questions or comments? Rich?
I did not.
Oh, okay. Oh, Kathleen? Did not. Okay.
I did not.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. Rich, did you have any questions, comments? Okay, Meredith?
I just can see I'm familiar with Greg Lombardi, the work from his design team, and it is the best, just very high quality. And I've seen also with the way the treatment of the other, the gate that's been installed. And I think that it's very lovely and fits in very nicely to this site. And I really like, so many times we see people taking trees down, and this is an opportunity to actually add some trees, so along a scenic roadway. So I appreciate that.
Excellent. Okay, I guess I would entertain a motion to
Denny.
approve. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Tim.
I had a quick question, and then it is a
Sure.
public hearing, so we do have to open it up to public comment.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me.
I just want to ask, is there any repaving of the driveway associated with this project?
Yes, the drive surface will be a new drive surface.
Okay, so we recently, just even last meeting, we approved a scenic roads application, and one of the things that we wanted to make sure about was, the move to preserve these existing trees is a good one, and I think you're right to do it, and we appreciate that, as it's kind of really material to the whole notion of scenic roads. But we do want to make sure that any repaving, even though we're not taking down trees, that we're not, doing anything that's going to unduly kind of distress the trees that are there. So, do you have any indication of kind of how far that kind of line of new pavement is?
It's Tim. It's great that you're bringing that up, because Denny and I actually talked about this. We go through extra effort in terms of preserving trees, especially when a client is invested in the trees as much as our client is with the use. So typically what we'll do is we'll have so there's some granite cobbles and the paved surface removed. We'll air spade the roots. And if we need to root prune the tree to accommodate the sub base for the driveway, we'll do that. But that will be in our specifications to the contractor when they're building it. And yes, I mean, there's additional investment for these trees to be saved, and the homeowners fully on board with that.
Excellent. Okay. Well, if everyone's okay, I guess we would like to open this up to public comment. Is there anyone in our audience tonight who would like to speak to this issue?
If you'd like to speak and you could use the raise hand function, that'll indicate that you'd like to speak, and we'll recognize you.
Denny, may I one last thing, sorry.
Absolutely.
At the last meeting where we did talk about another scenic way, we spoke about limiting the driveway width. And I think we limited it to 12 feet, if I'm not mistaken. So Mr. Madden, would the 12-foot wide driveway be an acceptable limitation for this?
It's currently designed to be 12 feet.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, we don't have dimensions.
The
Yeah,
gateway,
sorry.
just to give you a visual, the gateway is approximately 17 feet wide with the two swinging hinged gates. And then we have approximately 2.5 feet of green space in between the wall and the drive.
Okay, so I'll just wait until we get to speaking about potential conditions then. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on this or ask any questions?
Denny, I'm not seeing anybody.
Okay.
One thing I did want to mention is, and this is actually relevant to last week's hearing. This is an oversight on my part that I'm trying to correct. The scenic road, it's not a bylaw, it's a regulation. We talked about this a little bit last week, requires input from the Historical Commission. So both 237 Hillside, which was approved last week and conditioned upon a favorable report from the Historical Commission, as well as this application will be on the next agenda for the Historical Commission. So that'll be a condition on this approval if and when it comes down, kind of pending a favorable report from the Historical Commission. The regulation also requires the input of the Conservation Commission. which again, the oversight on my part, I did not reach out to the Conservation Commission on the previous one. So I've done that for both 1431 Brush Hill and 237 Hillside. I've been in touch with the chair of the Conservation Commission. I'll leave it up to his discretion whether he wants his entire board's kind of input and feedback on this. I did kind of send him the application materials and let him know that neither application contemplates the taking down of any trees on the scenic road. So that'll be just another condition on this approval if the planning board decides to give it is pending a favorable report from the Conservation Commission.
Denny, could I just ask if Tim knows when the Historical Commission will be meeting next?
I'm going to kick that to Meredith.
It's on this Tuesday, the 15th.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no objections, I'd like to close the public hearing and open it up to discussion of the planning board.
So moved.
Okay. All right, so you had mentioned.
You'll need a second and a vote.
Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me, Tim.
Second.
Thank you. Was that Meredith? Thank you.
Second.
Oh, Kathleen, thank you. Okay, all in favor? Kathleen? Kathleen O'Donnell, are you in favor? I'll go to Rich Beeler. Rich Beeler, are you in favor? Oh, Rich, you're muted, so I'll go back to Kathleen's in favor. She's giving me the thumbs up. Cheryl Tagayas,
Yes.
Meredith Hall,
Yes.
and Rich Beeler.
Yes, sorry, double
No,
mute.
that's okay. A little bumpy at the beginning. All right, so who would like to speak first? Cheryl, did you want to talk about conditions or?
Yeah, I just would like to put a similar condition as we did to the last one of a 12-foot maximum width to the driveway.
Okay,
And just Cheryl, for additional clarification, the driveway will be 12 feet wide, but as the radius, as it gets to the street, it's going to be significantly larger to provide access for cars. We're aware of that, correct?
Correct. But
Right.
we're,
thank you for that. We're in a, we closed to the public hearing and now we're deliberating, but thank you for that information. So, all right, I'm okay with
So-
that. as long
so
as we-
I guess what I would say is a 12-foot width with the exception of the flare where the driveway meets Brush Hill Road.
Okay. Thank you, with the exception of the flare where it meets the road. Okay, I'm okay with that. Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, okay, any other comments or questions before we entertain a motion?
Just to confirm those two conditions on the other two boards to
Oh.
provide.
Okay, that would be, we would say pending the approval of the Conservation Commission and Historic Commission. Okay, all right, so I will take a motion to approve this scenic bylaw project with the condition of a 12-foot maximum width with the exception of the flare where it meets the road and pending the approval of the Conservation Commission and Historic Committee. Does anyone want to make that motion?
I'll make that motion with just the correction, Historical Commission. rather than
Historical,
committee.
thank you. I should know
Commission.
that.
Thank
Thank you.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, anyone want a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Kathleen. On a ship, I understand. All in favor? I'll go to Kathleen first.
Aye.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Meredith Hall,
Yes.
Rich Beeler,
Yes,
Denny Swenson, yes. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Madden and Mr. Corcoran.
Thank you.
Great, thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thank you. All right, so Tim, okay to go into our second public hearing of 440 Granite Avenue?
Yes, I'm gonna go into the attendees and grab our folks. So while I'm doing that, so we've got Ellen. Allison, you're able to do this. Do you mind going in and pulling in Marion and the rest of the development team?
Sure, if they could just raise their hands because I don't know every single person's names.
See, this is why Allison's such an asset to this department,
Mhm.
because it's a very straightforward solution that I never would have remembered to ask to do. So thank you, Allison.
Of course.
So this is the second instance of the public hearing for site plan approval for 440 Granite Avenue. At the last public hearing on May 27th? We heard an introductory presentation from the development team. Board asked a few questions and sort of tried to figure out a kind of a rational way forward for kind of evaluating and reviewing the multiple kind of elements of this project. And I think the agreement was that this hearing would be focused on kind of the ground plane where the building hits the site, the site plan generally, circulation, kind of things of that nature. In the interim period, we did receive a letter from Marina Fernandez, who is the town engineer. I did at the very last minute send a slightly revised version of that letter to everybody. There was a slight typo, I think, in the first sentence that I don't even remember what it was, but Marina wants to be very precise in her language. So nothing substantively changed from the letter that I distributed. I believe it was yesterday, and I've also sent that to the applicant. We've also received a few comment letters from residents, which I've sent along. We did receive 2 memos from the development team. One with a rundown of answers to questions that were raised at the last public hearing, and then one that sort of goes through, and this was another kind of larger question, articulating how the project, is consistent with the East Milton Working Group report that we commissioned from Barrett Planning. So that's all those materials are in the folder. I believe they're up on the website, on the planning board website. I'm working with Julia Getman on kind of organizing that website as we get materials in, and making sure they're very clearly labeled and rational and comprehensible. We also, what else? We took a little field trip today, which was exciting, to see an example of the parking stacking system. Meredith and myself were there. Unfortunately, other folks weren't able to make it. There may be another opportunity for that. And we also had a site visit a few days ago just to kind of see the site at 440 Granite Ave. That's all that's happened in the interim. So I think with that, Denny, if you'll allow it, we'll ask Marion McKettrick, attorney for the development team, to begin her remarks and presentation.
Yes, please do. Good evening, Marion.
Good evening. We do plan to share screen in just a couple minutes. So if there's anything you have to do to let us share the screen, we'd appreciate it if you would do that. And I think it's going to be Tony Shao who's going to be doing that. Yeah.
And everyone should have the ability to share their screen. So.
Okay, so just want to introduce myself. I'm Marion McKettrick. I'm the attorney for the applicants. And with us tonight, we have Michael Moore, Pat Costello, the developers, Ellen Anceloni, and Tony Shao, who are architects who work with Feingold Alexander. And also I see Rob Law is here. What I wanted to do, and thank you very much, Tim, for doing it. I was going to recap what happened since the last meeting. But you have 2 memos from me. I would appreciate it if you take the time to go through them and let us know what questions you have and concerns. On the answers to questions, I just want to very quickly note that we investigated by getting an estimate from the assessor's office that the property tax value currently of this parcel is $38,394. and that after development with this proposal, it would be $341,048. That's the property tax annually, not the value of the whole development. So there would be a substantial increase in value. Also, that we want to just note that the developer will continue to own the commercial space at this site, which means that he will continue to control it and control its use. So while we're presenting to you what we think the use will be and how it will be limited, it's important to understand that that use will be controlled in the future by the people who are applying to you today. You asked for a little bit more detail on the designated loading zone. It would be used for all loading and unloading. It's on Granite Ave, and the town would have to approve the site. And that would also be the site for Uber or taxi rides to pull up. It would be the site for deliveries, both small and large. And there is a way, we believe, to designate to some of these services that this is exactly where they're supposed to park. So we've been doing some investigating on that. And the other question was that there will be charging stations on 20% of the residential parking spaces, and those can be, and more can be added in the future. We saw some of those today when we took the tour, because we expect that electric cars will be more prevalent in the future. I have read the East Milton Neighborhood Association email comments. All of us have. I've prepared some responses. We're going to be reviewing those, returning them to the Neighborhood Association, and also sending them to you, Tim. If you want to post those, you can. That would be helpful. We had the site walks. So what we would like to do tonight is to show you some additional exhibits. We're going to share screen, and Tony Shao is going to explain the exhibits to you. These are renderings and then some diagrams and charts. And we've also sent those to the planning board. So we hope that the planning staff can post those on the website as well. And in addition, on the side of the screen, we're also going to have the site plan from last week. It's much more detailed, and that way we'll be able to go back. We need to reference any page in the site plan. So Tony, whenever you're ready, you could start working on, or whoever's doing share screen.
There you go. Thank you very much. And again, appreciate your time this evening. So I'm just going to go right into it, in the interest of time. So I think what you're going to see here is a couple of additional images developing with particular concentration more at the pedestrian level of the project. This first view here is taken from the corner of Granite Ave and Mechanic Street, and it starts to show the intention, but also starts to give a sense about the scale. Again, what we have proposed here is to activate the ground floor along Granite Avenue with the commercial retail tenants and also the residential lobby as well. We are widening in some respects the relationship of the ground floor to the sidewalk and increasing that width in order to enhance greater pedestrian comfort and access. We also are planning to look at different ideas with respect to paving, dressing up certainly curbs both along Granite as well as Mechanic Street. In addition, we are providing things such as bike racks, storage for areas potentially for seating, and to the extent we're able to, tree planting as well. There's also been discussion about at the corner itself of whether we can do something to dress up the corner. We're looking at a range of options. This particular sketch view shows the idea that we could look at ideas of some kind of planter element, may or may not incorporate some seating, but this will also be predicated on the access and crosswalk, of course, as one comes to the corner. But these are early stages. We do imagine that the ground floor wants to be as open with a large expanse of transparency, viewing into the retail tenants. And I think that's the idea, to bring activation and life along this street, particularly as one moves and connects. And further also reinforcing the pedestrian connected to the business district in East Milton Square as well, to enhance that activity. So I think that's one of the key things. This sketch also does show that when one views the ground floor retail, that the residential component is above it. It does stretch out a couple feet beyond. That allows us to define the ground floor retail more distinctly, and allows sort of the residential to have a bit of separation from the ground floor retail, which is what you see in this particular sketch view. I'm going to just go through these, and then we can certainly entertain questions. Next. This is another view taken in the reverse direction, still along Granite Avenue, but at the other end of the project, looking back. And again, it just simply illustrates that the activation of the ground floor retail continues along the entire length of the street, and still with the idea that it enhances the activity, brings life, engenders as much transparency as possible for this retail activity that occurs at the ground plane. Next. And then just a sketch view looking along the length of the Granite Ave retail activity. So again, one sees here that we're attempting to activate with as much transparency as we can, opening this up to allow pedestrians and the retail tenants to really capture this sort of activation along the edge. And again, as a reminder, when we are proposing this project, we're limiting a number of curb cuts, which I think when several of us and some of you did a walkabout, you saw that there were some existing curb cuts occurring off of Granite. Those will now be eliminated because we're able to capture the entire edge. So I think in some ways this creates a greater continuity along the street, as well as tying the whole ground plane together in a much more unified way. Next. The other thing that I think we were asked to look at is some massing comparison diagrams. And what this particular diagram is going to illustrate is a couple of things. I'm going to start with the upper left view. This is taking a view along, these are taking views along Mechanic Street with the adjacent White House in the foreground. The one on the upper left shows an as-of-right scheme with a special permission for 65-foot high massing. And in order to demonstrate this, this actually shows what happens if the entire parcel is filled to the edge of the property line, or within the zoning requirements. So this is what results when one does an as-of-right scheme with special permission. If we look to the right of that, the as-of-right scheme as it currently exists, which allows up to 45 feet in height, this also demonstrates what happens when you fill this property to the edge, even at the 45-foot height, and to the extent at which it sort of really occupies the massing and really becomes a fairly large and dominating element along this whole parcel. The lower left image shows our current proposed design. And again, when we explained this at the previous meeting, the intention was to really try to maximize and push the bulk of the massing away from the residential neighborhood along Mechanic Street, and therefore load it towards Granite Ave in order to basically scale the project down and to put the least onus towards the back of the site, which particular sensitivity to the residences. And this is particularly illustrative in the plan diagrams on the right of this whole drawing. So you can see the as-of-right scheme on the left-hand side shows what happens if we literally take the full site and fill it to the edge and basically occupy the entire triangular parcel at a minimum of at least 45 feet when one does an approach like that. And then to the right, that is our currently proposed design for the residential project above retail at base, where you can see where we did basically push all the massing along Granite Avenue and push it as far as ways we're able to against the backside to minimize as much as possible the extent of the project's bulk and massing towards the residential district at the rear. Next. So there was some other information that we were requested to respond to. So this gives some dimensional relationships on the ground floor site plan view. Again, the proposed building is shown in orange, and then it illustrates the lower level in the back with the 2-story with a private terrace, which is at 16'8" in height, and then the green roof, which covers some of the open parking areas below at 10 feet in height. So it is stepping down significantly as we move towards the back. And I'm just going to simply rotate around some dimensional thing. So starting at the right-hand corner, the 39 feet is showing the distance from the closest corner of our project to the adjacent parcel 42 on Mechanic Street, which is a commercial use. I believe there's some attorney's office currently occupying that building, a 3-story building. And as one moves further down Mechanic Street, you can see the basic relation issues. So 61 feet is the closest corner with respect to the residence at 30 Mechanic Street. It is 94 feet away from the 26th residence on Mechanic Street when measured from the building bulk as it pushes back. And then the lower part, the green roof area that is only 10 feet in height, is 55 feet get away from the closest corner of the address at 26 Mechanic Street. And then as we come around the corner, the parcel and the house next to the site at 23 Mechanic, the closest distance is 25 feet, but that is to the lower 10-foot high portion of the project. And then it's 45 feet at its closest distance to the higher portion of the proposed building. So I think, again, and just as a reminder, generally along Granite Avenue, we are essentially pulling back from the property line to the ground floor. We're holding back approximately 5 feet away from the property line. And then on the upper floor is 2 feet back as the residential elements extend above it. And then similarly, when we look at Mechanic Street, we're also 5 feet back at the ground level from the property line. And then the upper levels are 2 feet. So this gives you some sense about the disposition relating to Mechanic and Avenue. And then finally, along the left-hand side, with respect to the property line that runs along that particular edge, we are basically varying, but it's roughly 6'9", 6 to 9 feet, excuse me, being held away from the property line, which, as those of us who are on site may recall, that it just abuts the Citizens Bank at the edge of the site where there's currently a fairly large parking area. Then the upper levels, again, is plus or minus 6 feet from the property line at the edge of the site. So I think this, basically, these images represents some more detailed information that you had asked us to provide. And at this point, I think, Marion, is there any additional information you wanted to convey at this stage?
Well, unless the planning board wants me to go through any of my response memos, the Barrett or the questions, this is what we wanted to present to you. I did want to mention a couple of things. As Tim Chewinski said, we've received the letter from the Department of Public Works that we've been waiting for about engineering, water, sewer, drainage, and traffic. And there are a number of recommendations for peer reviews or that sort of review in there. So there's plenty of work to do. In some cases, we have to do initial work evaluating these water and I think the sewer line, and then we have to have that peer reviewed. And those will be some of the next steps. Those reports will be coming back eventually to the planning board. The letter also has recommendations about specifications for the water system, ADA access. They asked for a letter from the Historic Commission. There is one on file with the building commissioner because we had a meeting with the Historic Commission and they determined the buildings could be taken down. If we'll provide a copy of that, and if you need more detail, we'll ask the Historic Commission for that, Historical Commission. And so there are a number of steps. The other thing I want to mention is on the parking tour, it is very helpful to see how one of these facilities operates. If you are in the area, and I know Danny Swenson has asked to do it at another time, we'll try to set up one more time to do the tour. I now know where the site we visited is, and if Michael Moore can make arrangements, it might even be possible that just I could meet you there, and then there has to be someone at the facility who explains how it works. So we'll work on that, and we'll let you know if we have another date for that purpose. So that's a quick summary of what we wanted to give you tonight. We were interested in your ideas about streetscape improvements and your comments and on everything we've presented. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to open it up to the board to see if the board has comments, and then we can open it up to the public to see if they have questions and comments. So please speak up, any board members, if you would like, or if you'd like to go directly to the public, that's fine too.
Danny,
Yes.
I can speak up a little. The one thing that was really apparent on the site walk is the proximity of those power poles that we see in this view on the screen right now. And it did concern me about the viability of putting trees in that location. And if you could go back to the site plan which showed the curbside parking, where there's some net gain here. You know, one of the things that I've always thought since we started the master plan work years ago was how inhospitable Granite Avenue is. and that if we could introduce trees to it, that it might be helpful. So I, for one, would be interested in not having as many parking spaces and instead having at least 2 or 3 street trees sort of integrated, so into bump outs. I also think it would help with speed on Granite Avenue. I think maybe Tim, you could speak to urban design kind of standards or thinking about when you have, lots of times what's being done, even probably what's being done in the square right now, is actually having more bump outs. It's safer for pedestrians, and it does tend to slow cars down. So, so that's one thing I wanted to throw out to the applicant and to the other board members, because I do think, I appreciate the fact that the sidewalk is being widened, but because the building steps out further up above it, it does limit the area which the trees can go. And I think it would be nice too, if there are tenants in those commercial spaces that do have a public element, if it were something that could spill out a little bit and not feel like you're right on top of parked cars, that it could be a more inviting pedestrian and retail environment, and even for the entrance into the residential units up above. And then,
Can I actually
Sure.
comment on that in relation to the trees before you go into your next comment? I had a similar concern about trees, and that was the trees had to remain small-ish so they wouldn't run into the wires above. Do you think your idea would allow them to be on the other side of the wires, or do you think they would still have to be small? And the reason I am not happy about the small is because it makes the building feel even bigger with the smallish trees. But go ahead.
I think they would be on the other side, Denny, and I think they might still have to be columnar, just kind of given that environment. I wouldn't even venture to propose what species would survive there well or thrive there well. I'd leave it to a landscape architect to advise us on that. I see it as something where it's aspirational for where Granite Ave could go in the future, that it not be such a hot and noisy roadway, that even if we begin to introduce it as a more pedestrian feel with some landscape, with some site furnishings, then as things change on Granite Ave over time, like when we were on the site walk, I noted that banks, banking is changing, the sort of idea of how we pay for things, there's these new currencies and also all sorts of things. And maybe we won't have a need for such a big parking lot for a bank at some point down the road. So if this might seem like things that are not really that suitable in today's environment, it's more thinking about this long-term vision of where the square could go. So that's kind of what my thinking was there. So I would ask the applicant to maybe come back to us with some ideas about that, Denny, what would work and whether they think that it would make sense with the power lines that are there. And, I did read through the memo. Is it okay, Denny, if I mention this next thing now? Keep going.
Yes.
Okay, so the memo related to taking a look at the Barrett planning report. And again, kind of looking on sites, I did note that the memo said that there's very little parking associated with this site currently, and that the increase in commercial space is rather modest. And so I'd like for us to consider not requiring those parking spaces that are under that green roof, and let that become a small pocket park, and then have that pedestrian connection. Again, maybe that pedestrian connection is aspirational for now, because, I don't know, is it more, I just feel as if you're walking in this neighborhood and you want to encourage people to walk to Citizens instead of drive to Citizens. If there's a more hospitable way to get there than having to walk along Granite Ave, then maybe people might do that. So I'd like for that to be something that the applicant considers. I know we discussed it last meeting, and I don't know that they've had any consideration of changing their plan in that regard. So I appreciate the diagrams and the things that we asked for them to look at. I think it is important for us to see these dimensions and understand the distances, because I absolutely support putting the bulk of the building towards Granite Ave. And I think we see that the two or the three most proximate residential buildings, numbers 23, 26, and 30. What's near them is very low, actually. It's only the green roof and the terrace, like, so 10 to 16 feet, I heard. And I see in this site plan that you've eliminated one of the curb cuts on Mechanic. And I wanted to ask if that's intentional, because I see that as a big improvement too, that you can consolidate that into one curb cut, and that that you could incorporate street trees on Mechanic. I think the sketch shows that, but it would be good to have a site plan show these trees as well.
You want me to answer that, Cheryl, or should I wait?
Sure, yeah.
Yes, I thank you for pointing that out. Yes, we did look at that question that was raised actually at our walkabout, and I think that we believe we can eliminate that curb cut. That particular curb cut was going into a receiving area, and we believe that we do not need to have such a dedicated curb cut for that use, and so that's why in this instance we're showing it. But we will update the ground floor plan to reflect that.
Great, that's an improvement. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment on the street trees? We're also talking to the Street Tree Advisory Committee. They haven't all responded yet, but several of them have, with a number of specifics. And they too would like to see the maximum number of street trees. The only issue that we saw when we discussed this was that we didn't want car doors opening into a street tree, because it would likely damage the tree even at some distance. So we'll look again at these dimensions and whether or not a parking space has to be eliminated. I think the goal is to maximize the number of street trees. The Street Tree Advisory Committee felt that the trees could not be too wide, and columnar is a good way of describing them. And they're looking at the tree species, and of course, there's a landscape architect working on this plan. So those are really helpful comments, and we'd appreciate as many as we can get. Thank
I have
you.
another comment, if I may, along the lines of that landscape. When walking along the sidewalk on Granite Ave at the sidewalk, the florist had some planters and hanging plants, and even that made it much more pleasant to walk, even though it was a short distance. I'm reminded of a building on Washington Street in the south end of Boston. And I see these where in this plan here, where the building has these kind of triangular step-ins. If you did that at the ground floor, you could integrate planters, or you'd have a place for planters, which is what that building in the south end has. And it kind of defines the separate entrances to the retail or commercial spaces, and gives opportunity for plant material. So tall planters, with abundant plantings can be quite attractive there too, if the street trees can't provide enough. And I know I'm venturing into Denny and Meredith's territory here talking about plantings, but I do think these things make a big difference, at the sidewalk, where buildings are really perceived, especially here when you're not on the Granite Ave, you're not going to be far away from it. And I still am interested in that Mechanic Street elevation, what that feels like on the sidewalk there, because it is a little bit taller there, but the part that's I know further away from the residential buildings. We looked at the materials when we were on site, and I don't know if you were going to talk any further about your materials, Tony, based on that site walk.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. We're still studying the materials, and I think that at the next go around, we will have probably more forthcoming information. We're exploring both the responsive material question that was raised, as well as to some extent some of the palette too, in terms of the refinement of the materials. But I think that's an ongoing thing we're continuing to look at. But we definitely appreciate that pointing that out during our walkabout.
Okay,
I just want to ask, I don't understand the elevation question, Cheryl, and I know you asked it before, and maybe everybody else does, so I apologize. But can
That's
you?
okay. I'm talking about the building elevation and the materials. And so
Okay,
what does that, because that Mechanic Street is a place that you're going to perceive that facade differently than you will Granite Ave, just because of Granite Ave being more highway oriented and Mechanic Street, I do like the fact here, it was pointed out when we were there again, that the street asphalt blends right into sidewalk so that people park right on that. And here they're proposing a curb and an actual sidewalk. So I actually think that's another improvement. So as we get improvements in East Milton in this location, again, that provides a much better pedestrian environment. So I'm hoping again that we see more people walking and that rather than driving. And so when you're walking, you perceive buildings differently than you do when you're driving. And I'm just was asking because the choice of materials, if you have something that's more texture, more granular, more human scaled, when it's closer to someone, then it's perceived differently than if you have that kind of material that you're only seeing from a car far away. So where the materials are employed in terms of where they're seen from is just what I was talking about, Marion. So hopefully that makes
that's
it
very
clear.
helpful. Thank you. I understand much better. Thank you.
Okay.
Denny,
Okay.
could I possibly chime in on
Yes,
something?
please
I-
do.
I
Please
think
do.
only because it's relevant to something that Cheryl brought up, and I
Thank
want to
you.
make sure it's fresh. The point about those sort of employee, I think there's 4 parking spaces in the kind of the right angle of the building.
Yes.
And so the building inspector, and I think others have kind of raised the concern about these parking spaces that,
Mhm.
needing to kind of back out across the sidewalk is not the best condition. And Cheryl kind of mentioned that, those spaces may be an opportunity to green up that corner and really sort of help to buffer that corner of the building as it relates to the residential portion of the neighborhood. Eliminating those parking spaces altogether as an option. And I wanted to just bring up some data that we've been collecting over the course of several years. So I'm going to share my screen for just a minute. So I'm going to stop your share screen, unfortunately, and bring up a few of the parking studies that have been done in East Milton over the course of recent history. This is one that back in the old days of Tim Zerwinski, assistant town planner, in 2015 that we did in collaboration with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council of a parking occupancy and turnover study. And the way this basically goes is you walk up and down every street, you record, the license plate numbers, the last couple digits, just so you know who's parking where. And every half hour you do a lap and you see who's parked where. And that gives you an idea of not just, the occupancy of the parking spaces, but how long people are parking in these spaces. And I just wanted to sort of highlight Granite Ave, east side. So from Mechanic to Adams Street, which is right in front of this building, and then Pierce to Mechanic, which is sort of if you continue south on Granite Ave, there's parking on Granite Ave, totaling about 23 spaces. That's regulated parking, or it was regulated parking in 2015 at 2 hours. The average occupancy across the entire day, and that's from 8 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., is 43% for Mechanic Street to Adams Street and 47% from Pierce to Mechanic. So that's less than half of the spaces on average are occupied. In 2010, when Howard Stein Hudson did a similar study in sort of anticipation of the East Milton Deck project, it was about a third. So there's an increase from 2010 to 2015, but still not breaking the halfway point. We also recently had Beta Group in 2019 do a East Milton curbside usage study where they also did a parking occupancy and turnover summary. This is sort of Granite Ave south of Adams Street. These are the 10 spaces. So this is basically only from Adam Street to Mechanic, but it's relevant to this conversation. Finding really similar results from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Reaching 59% occupancy kind of in the middle of the day, but on average over the course of the day, those spaces are 38% occupied. It's my dirty little secret. Whenever I go to East Milton, I don't bother on Adam Street. I always go to Granite Ave because I know there'll be a spot. So the reason I want to bring this up is because right in front of the building, obviously, is a primary concern. There's going to be a new set of uses there. Depending on what they are, maybe they'll bring more parking, maybe they'll bring less parking. But there's a demonstrated empirical body of evidence that there are spaces in front of this building. And the reason I wanted to talk about it as it relates to the employee parking that's proposed is that this portion from Pierce to Mechanic Street, again, almost as far away from the heart of the square as you can get and still be in town of Milton, but it is regulated parking. One potential strategy that the applicant could potentially discuss with the Traffic Commission, and Marion's familiar with this kind of conversation because she just had one yesterday about 25 Bryan Ave, is potentially converting some of those 2-hour kind of general parking spaces from Pierce to Mechanic from general purpose parking to service zone parking. Those are already very seldomly used spaces by members of the public. The strategy behind service zone parking is this is for employees. You get a service zone sticker. You get to park in any service zone. We try to put them a little bit further away from kind of the heart of the commercial uses so that you don't have employees parking all day on Adam Street in front of Dunkies. That's a very high profile spot. We want you parked a little bit farther away. The Traffic Commission, is oftentimes favorable to those sorts of things because it does take longer term parking out of the heart of the square. So, I can't speak for the other members of the Traffic Commission, but it is something that we've seen in the past and could be a strategy to sort of mitigate the loss of that on-site employee parking, which I think A, would alleviate a safety concern, and B, give the potential for some more greening up and softening of that edge. So, and these reports are all available. I can send them to whoever wants to see them. And I'm going to stop my share right now.
Okay, excellent. Is there anyone else on the board who would like to speak before we open it up to public questions and comment?
I just was going to say just a few comments. It was really helpful to do the site walk today. Thank you so much for those who came out and the site walk that we did last week, but then what we did today to go see the parking structure was really helpful, I thought. Cheryl, I really liked what you were adding about the trees because that's been a concern about, I feel like this is an opportunity for us to really improve this area from a streetscape perspective, and how do we do that while looking at the building at the same time? And I think that's very useful, especially adding trees on Mechanic Street, which I thought was something that we should definitely look at. And I also really liked your first schematic that you introduced this evening, where you had a sort of a planter and sort of a green triangular space to sort of buffer that front entryway. Exactly that picture. I thought that really is helpful to see it on that level. And also just from a safety, I was thinking bollards can sometimes be used. You do have some sometimes vehicles going by, and that would make one of the comments that we heard last time was improving sort of the pedestrian access, from the Pierce neighbors and allowing them to feel safe walking along. And sometimes bollards give that sense of when you're crossing a street that it's a sense of protection there. And I just, I continue to look at this building, as you all have heard my comments previously, and I just am trying to, I can envision this in the Seaport. I can envision this building in South Boston. I can envision this in other downtown areas, but I am really struggling to envision this as the opportunity that we have right now to improve East Milton Square. And I think I embrace this concept. I love the idea of this project, and I love there's so much just thinking about green technology, the solar. There's so much about this project that I like, but aesthetically, I just am. And it was, one of the comments of one of the neighbors said, "I just want to cry." And I don't want this project to be something that makes our East Milton neighbors feel like they just want to give up and they have saved their whole lives for these homes that they have. And suddenly, not that their property values are going to go down, because I think a developer would scoop these properties up, but that these people that they are feeling like they're losing their neighborhood. And I really just want to see a way that we can work with East Milton Square and really reflect something, or have a building that reflects the town of Milton. And I'm not seeing this as a gateway building to really connect with anything else in our community. I was looking back at sort of our master plan and some of the sensitivity about how we grow as a town and how we build and develop, but that we connect. And this, I don't even see connecting to the other parts of East Milton, never mind the rest of the town. So I would really like to see possibly just some options from the developer on, and I recognize that that it will be taller, it will be more dense, and this is, an appropriate site, maybe being on the expressway, but how we connect and how we make it, how we design it to fit in, and while adding the important things like commercial space, affordable housing, all of those other things, and really enhance this area. I have sent some photographs to Tim. I'm open, I'm not trying to design the building, but I just really would like to see something that shows that it is trying to relate to the rest of East Milton Square and to the rest of the town. So I just would like to see continued focus and discussion on that.
Thank you, Meredith. I am actually struggling a little bit too on the impact of the neighborhood. The height is a problem for me. The way that it's, 5 stories is going to have a significant impact on that neighborhood, and I do feel for the neighbors when they call in and they say they're struggling too. I have not seen the parking puzzle mechanism yet, but I would like to understand how to ensure that there will be someone available to get anyone's car out at any moment, 24/7. I just don't, that's a big concern, and safety challenges too. A mechanic as a one-way, I think it was Mr. Coyne, brought up some issues. I'm not sure, are people able to see me right now? I don't know if cable access is able to put, my video is turned on, but I don't think I'm getting seen. But anyway, I don't think the 5-story part of the building will impact the highway, but I'm concerned about the impact on the neighborhood. And I know Mechanic doesn't have that many historical structures on it, but it does, right next door, the street parallel to it, Pierce, has some spectacular historical turn of the century houses sprinkled all throughout it. And they're going to be looking out and seeing this huge 5-story building that's very modern. So when I was on site, I mentioned maybe we could think about, well, I would love to think about bringing the site down in height, maybe a 3-story to a 4-story step, something along those lines would be much more palatable. Some brick that would tie into the properties around it. I noticed there is a lot of brick properties around it that could help tie in. I'm just trying to find a way to make the design more village-like and less modern, with some sense of relationship to what's around it. For me, the gray and black just don't relate to what's in that area, or frankly, anywhere in town. 88 Wharf is a tallish building, but it has some wonderful architectural elements that work with the Lower Mills and Village area. So I think 88 Wharf is kind of a good example of how to tie things in. I do like the idea of the pocket park. I thought of it myself on the site walk. I think that could be helpful. I just think we need to
Sorry, go ahead.
think about the precedent setting we're doing here. You know, that's why I liked Cheryl's discussion on the trees, because we want what happens here to kind of be repeated or sprinkled throughout East Milton. So I think I want to, you know, hear from the public too about what it is that they would like to see as precedent.
Denny, can I
setting.
make a suggestion?
Mhm.
You know, obviously, you all know that I'm an architect who's practiced for over 30 years. And so I would like to suggest a couple of tools that might be helpful for people in understanding. And, you know, one is that, you know, height is, I think, something that people talk about as if height in and of itself is what people perceive. And I think, like what I was trying to say earlier about where we perceive height and how we perceive height for both as a pedestrian and in a vehicle is really a more strategic way to think about height. So for example, on this, like if you took this site as a triangle and you just took the floors and you stepped the floors in, and in fact, I think Franklin Alexander could probably demonstrate this with a little massing diagram, that if you took a triangle and you stepped them in, that your perceived height on mechanics is probably going to be more impactful than what they've done, which is shift the height over towards the highway. And so I think I would suggest to them if they demonstrate some of why, I mean, I actually agree with this massing strategy. So this isn't the architecture, this isn't the materials, this is like scale strategy of you're shifting the bulk of that height towards the highway because it's not perceived by most people, particularly as a pedestrian. So now the portion of the building that's taller on Mechanic Street is actually facing a commercial building. And we have to remember that this is in a commercial district and it's not in a residential district. So we have these, Milton has these boundaries, and we have this strange scenario, which the Barrett report talks about, and I'd like for us to talk about more at some point, is that this portion is a very narrow portion of commercial. And, you know, it's how do you do a good commercial development on something so narrow? Because you have a highway on one side and residences on the other side. It's a very challenging, you know, architectural problem. And, you know, I'm sure that Feingold Alexander went through some different scenarios in arriving at this one. So maybe what they can do is show us how they arrived at this by showing us why these other kind of massing strategies they don't think are as effective as this one. I mean, that's just Tony, or if you want to kind of comment on that. And then I do have another suggestion in terms of the architecture itself. So Denny, these are ideas to address what you and Meredith have raised as your concerns. I'm giving some suggestions to the architect how they can demonstrate or respond to them.
If I may, thank you very much for your comments on everyone. I know that this is obviously a, you know, it's a sensitive issue, and as Cheryl and others have said, you know, it is challenging trying to impact the design to the site. But I do think that, again, I'm coming back to this diagram, and I know it's a little bit simplistic, but if one examines the as of right scheme, you know, this is something which we are not wanting to do, which is the as of right. We can go up to 45 feet in height, and it can occupy a major chunk of Mechanic Street in the as of right approach. So this is an approach we don't want to do. This is definitely not what we're suggesting, but it's just by comparison why we've taken the approach that we have, which is to really try to push the bulk of the massing away, as you can see in the lower left, and load it towards Granite Avenue. And even at the top level, we've further stepped back that level too, in order to scale back there as much as we're able to. I think the other interesting comments that come about with respect to the surface parking and the trade-off opportunity, I think it's a really interesting discussion, because if you're just going to imagine, thinking about that ground plane, and I think many have commented about the actual perception when one walks around a parcel or a project, you're really perceiving what happens in the first level or two. So if we're able to soften that, if that really becomes a strong desire in order to make the scale a bit more pedestrian friendly, and if that consideration of thinking about the 4 surface parking spaces being reallocated, redistributed, or just eliminated, and can reconsider that for more a greenscape approach or pocket park approach or some other idea, which I think does play to some of the other strategies that have been outlined in your own master plan thinking. I think that's a really interesting opportunity, because that also suggests to us that on some ways on the backside, if we can further soften that by introducing more greenscape, adding more planting, creating more pedestrian friendly, to further soften that whole edge and scale it down, I think that's all to the good. So I think we're very open to trying to think about that. I think with respect to the design approach, I mean, we're continuing to refine and study it. I will say that one of the things that we did think about, and just even thinking about the history of the site in East Milton, the fact that originally this partly was a historic district, a railway historic district, and in point of fact, this part of the site originally was developed to convey granite along the edge. So for us, that was actually a source of inspiration, reaching back to the roots and the history of this particular part of East Milton, and thinking about granite, and in some sense, the palette and the consideration of the materials was really with a nod towards that. We were looking at brick. We think that brick certainly seemed appropriate. It is found in the district, and choosing the color of brick that spoke more to that history. And also, I think the fact that we are facing the highway, we were concerned about that too, that we were trying to use, in some ways, the building mass to help mitigate sound also to the neighborhood, because it is a very loud and very noisy street. And the other factor, unfortunately, is that with the amount of vehicular traffic going along the edge, we were also concerned with pollution, and eventually whatever materials we choose, the unfortunate byproduct of pollution is discoloration of materials. So I think we were very cognizant of a lot of things, but we're certainly wanting to look and refine and bring a level of material expression and studies that will provide more scale and detail. I think we're definitely all interested in. So.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl, did you have one more comment or question?
I think Tony actually addressed that if they're planning to come back to us with more of that, then that was it. Then thank you.
Okay, great. Kathleen, Rich, did you want to comments, questions before we open it up to the public?
No, I don't. I'd like to hear
Thank
from
you, Rich. Okay, Kathleen. All right, I guess we'll open it up to the public. I don't know if Tim can check for any hands.
Yeah, if folks want to speak on anything they've heard tonight, please use the raise hand function, and we'll take you in order of your hand raisings. I'm not seeing anyone just yet, but maybe we'll give folks a little bit of time.
Okay.
Were we anticipating this being on the agenda in 2 weeks or in our next meeting?
I think so, yeah. Did you have an opinion on that, Cheryl?
No, it's hopefully we can, make some, hopefully they have some adequate time to make some progress on those things about the scale and the architectural aspects of it. I think we're making, some good progress on the discussion at the pedestrian scale.
Well, they may prefer to wait a couple of weeks, 4 weeks or something. It's up to, I guess I will leave that up to Tim and Marion to work out.
I would just suggest that, unless the architectural firm disagrees with me, that you do put it on the schedule, but that, I know the planning board likes to get materials not the day before the meeting.
Thank you.
We get information sometimes that late. You just can't respond in time. So, you know, if we're able to give you materials in enough advance time, then we'd like to continue to make progress. So there's so many different issues here. And then we have all those points made by the engineers. Those are going to have to be worked on. We'll have plenty to do. We know you have other business to conduct. So I'd like you to keep it on the schedule, but we will give you notice. And if it turns out that you don't need it, you can post that. You still have to open and close the hearing, but you can just continue it.
Okay, and thank you for all the materials that you've been giving us to post for the public, so the public can keep up to date with all the updates and revisions going on. So thank you.
Yeah, and we'll be putting this this presentation up on the planning board website. Just let me make sure I know. Hold on a sec. I'll tell you exactly where to go to find it. But in the meantime, one thing that I think is someone is hearing some stuff. The town engineer had recommended some peer reviews of the traffic analysis and of the stormwater and drainage plan. I don't know if someone needs to mute themselves or something. There's some.
It might be Kathleen. Let me text her.
No, don't text me. I've been
Okay.
signing, I've been kicked off at least 8 times in the last 15 minutes.
Oh my
So I've
goodness.
now signed on the phone instead of the iPad.
Okay.
And I did want to just say a couple of brief items is that I've been walking around East Milton for 30 years. There is no stylistic idea of East Milton. I appreciate the design of this project as sort of providing some kind of entrance to East Milton, which right now, Dave's Bike Shop, however much we liked it, was not exactly a stunning way to drive off the expressway and head into East Milton. I do know that parking is a serious issue. I appreciate the idea of the street trees and that sort of thing, but the idea of giving up the parking is a little bit concerning to me. I like the way that this project sort of addresses the cutting off of all the entrances on Mechanic Street, and sort of, I like the information that has been provided on the setbacks and the fact that it's sort of facing the expressway. I did notice those poles. I mentioned those the last time. And so I'm concerned about street trees because I've seen the street trees further down Granite in front of the bagel shop and in front of the real estate company, and all of them have died. They are being replaced gradually, but that's a tough place to have a street tree. So hopefully the street tree committee has some better idea about what would survive in that pretty harsh environment. And I just sort of applaud this project, and they're working away on this, and I appreciate the input that everybody has provided. And now I'm going to be muting myself for probably the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I agree with you on the telephone poles. I would love to see, but I understand that's a challenge, but anything that could be done. I think Kathleen had suggested burying the electric wires, which would be ideal.
So we have a meeting on site with Eversource on Monday, and Mike Dennehy is facilitating the appropriate town engineers and wiring, and we're going to push hard to put it underground. We don't control it, but we can definitely help facilitate it. So we're going to give it a go to try and put it on underground.
Oh, that would make such a difference. I wish you all the luck. I hope you get that.
We'll try.
Thank you.
Denny, just I was saying, if you go to the planning board website on townofmilton.org, and on the left side under development and zoning proposals, there's a link to all of the documents. We've got the site plan review application and the 2 memos that Marion's already submitted, and we'll get this presentation up on that site. That'll be where we post all the new documents that come in. What I had wanted to say was that the town engineer's comment letter recommended peer review of the traffic analysis and the stormwater and drainage plan. If the board would like, I can begin to start to procure those services. It'll take a little bit to get some quotes, But I can get started on that as soon as I get the go ahead, and we can kind of get that in motion. Just knowing this is obviously not as big a project as some of the 40B projects that we have, but it is a multifamily project. It is, significant for Town of Milton. It does take time for these reviews to happen. So, we'll just want to sort of take that into account. It's something the board typically does this on projects of this size and scale. Usually at the recommendation of the town engineer, very capable folks in that office, but in terms of bandwidth and capacity, just from a staffing level, really can't get into the weeds that we need to on these analyses. So if you'll give me the go ahead, I can get working on that and kind of keep everybody updated on my progress on procuring those.
Okay, Tim, do you need us to take a vote on that or is that,
Jenny?
yes, Cheryl?
Is that peer review come from the planning board budget, or would that come from the applicant's resources?
That's
Marion's smiling.
that's traditionally at the
I've never
expense
seen the town pay for it.
So we
Well,
will.
where it's not where this was not, is not so specific because of the way this project is going, this process. It wasn't clear to me that it was something that we could mandate,
Yeah,
but
It
I'm
is
happy.
site plan. Yeah, site plan review is a little different, but there's a whole list of peer reviews they're talking about. So, the traffic peer review, that's pretty standard, have someone else take a look at the study and evaluate it and critique it. And stormwater is the same sort of thing. On the other ones, water pipe, I don't know, sewer capacity, I don't understand those as well. And that may really be the town looking at it. The town needs to look, usually the town can give us advice on this. I don't know whether it's because, and then you come in with your plan based on the town's advice. What they're doing here is they're telling us to tell them what the town's capacity is. And that's a little different than I've seen in the past. I'm not objecting.
And we can get you in touch with Marina and kind of figure out exactly what it is we're looking for and how to get it done.
Okay, so I mean, whatever we have to do, we'll certainly do. It's up to the planning board, I think, who pays for it, but.
Yeah, so it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense to me to do the traffic and the stormwater. We typically do those. And I leave it to your conversation with the town engineer about the water and sewer. The sanitary sewer, I guess is what we're talking about, water and sanitary.
Right.
But, yeah.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
So Denny, if we need a motion, I will make a motion that we authorize Tim to receive quotes from peer review consultants for traffic and stormwater peer review. And that we ask that the expense of those be borne by the applicants.
Thank you, Cheryl. Would anyone like to second Cheryl's motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Meredith. Okay, all in favor, Cheryl Tagayas,
Yes.
Meredith Hall,
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell. I'll go to Rich while Kathleen catches up.
Yes.
Rich Beeler's yes. Kathleen O'Donnell?
Yes,
Oh, good.
I couldn't
Denny
find
Swenson.
I couldn't find the mute button, sorry.
Denny Swenson is yes as well. Thank you. Okay, is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this tonight? I don't know, Tim, are you muted or?
We had a quick hand that went up and then down. I didn't see who it was.
Oh, okay.
But maybe we'll give it another 10 seconds.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Well, it's been a lot of information, and I wanted to thank the East Milton Neighborhood Association for writing in. I'm happy to hear that the applicant has already looked at their comments and is formulating responses to them. It's been very helpful, all the materials that you've been providing and updating. So I think, we're working really hard to make this better every day. So.
Denny, did you want to make note that we received a couple of other emails that were from individuals that are not necessarily representing the neighborhood association?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I wasn't at my desk all day, so thank you for letting me know that. That's great to hear. I'm glad that the public is interacting. And I hope that the public feels comfortable to speak in future meetings, either during citizen speak or during the process. If they prefer to send emails, we welcome those. We do want to hear it. This is a busy part of town, and I'm sure a lot of people are interested in this, so I look forward to hearing from them. All right, if Tim,
So do we want to continue this to 7:05 on June 24th?
yes.
Is that the next
And-
meeting?
Yes, and if the applicant would like to take a breather and come to the next meeting, that would be great too. I know you have a lot to catch up on. So we'll put you there as a placeholder. Please let Tim know. As Marion said, we'd like to get our materials in as far in advance as we can. So thank you.
So I'll make that motion to continue the public hearing to June 24th at 7:05.
Okay, would anyone like to second?
Second,
Okay, all in favor, Cheryl Tagayas,
Yes.
Meredith Hall,
yes.
Rich Beeler,
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell,
Yes.
Denny Swenson is a yes too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Marion. and Thank you, the rest of the
Right.
team.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye now. All right. So I think we can go on to new business. And Tim, I'm thinking we could start with report on 23 Wentworth Farm landscape plans.
So Denny, I actually have a request or
Sure.
a recommendation or a bit of conversation to take a few items on the agenda out of order. There's a lot of still really important stuff to talk about. There are two items that have kind of folks from the outside involved, and rather than kind of make them wait till the very end, I was thinking if we could, under new business, do the informational presentation on zoning proposal for BID Milton land on Highland Street.
Yes, thank
and-
you.
And then after that, take the approval of Walcott Woods condominium documents item from old business and do that. And then we can get into the design guidelines proposals, the Wentworth Farm landscape plan, and the town meeting articles.
Okay. Okay, that sounds like a good plan. Okay, so let's talk about the memory clinic. Do we have?
So- So I've got a list from Ned Corcoran of folks that would like to be promoted to panelists to speak on this. I'm going to use an innovative technique that I just learned. If anyone that is associated with that project could raise their hand to be promoted to panelist. That's folks from the BID Milton team. Yeah, there we go, everyone. So we're gonna promote this person. We're gonna promote this person and this person. And this one, and that one. And I think that's everybody. What I'll say, just by way of kind of introduction of the introduction that we're about to get, is just that this item is meant to be sort of an introduction of BID Milton's development partner land that they are interested in redeveloping on Highland Street. Ned and his clients can talk a little bit more in detail about what the proposal is. But it will involve a change in zoning, which is kind of why we're talking about it in anticipation of fall town meeting. I'll leave it to you to kind of figure out how in-depth of a conversation you want to have right now. I think the team is working on their proposal and their proposed changes. There may be more opportunity to have a more in-depth conversation with some more materials and some more, obviously, if we get to that point, public participation via a public hearing process. But I think one thing to kind of keep in mind as we have this conversation, and Cheryl kind of brought this up, I think at the last meeting, was a consideration of whether the planning board wants to adopt this article as its article, or for the applicants to proceed as a citizen's petition. Those are, there's two different mechanisms to go through town meeting for zoning. But just, whether or not that decision gets made tonight or not, I think it's something to keep in back of mind. So with that, Denny, if you'll allow Ned Corcoran, who's representing the BID Milton team, to make a presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Denny, and members of the board. Again, for the record, Ned Corcoran. And I am pleased to be joined by Rich Fernandez, who is the president of the BID Milton Hospital, and three representatives of their development team, which is Northbridge Companies, Jim Coughlin, who is their CEO, Wendy Nowakunski, who is their president. They are the two founders of the company, and Sean Bertram, who is their project management and leader on this project. A very quick overview. I'll hand it to Rich for a quick overview on how the process engaged by the hospital to lead to the selection of Northbridge, and then introduce Northbridge to tell you about themselves, what their site plan is, and then I'll come back to me with an overview of where I think the next steps need to be. One thing I think it's important to know up front is that we have had that since Northbridge was selected and they entered into the purchase and sale agreement with the hospital, we've had 3 meetings with the neighborhood, including one last night. And we are scheduling meetings with them each night before we meet with the planning board, so that any information that we share with you is shared with them first. We want them fully engaged and their comments fully understood and heard before we move forward through the public process. So with that, let me hand it to Rich quickly, if he can give an overview of the process that the hospital went through and the selection that was made, and then we'll forward into an overview of Northbridge and their draft of site plan and overview of their plan. Thank you. Rich, you there? Maybe if Rich is, I saw that he was on, maybe having trouble. Let me hand it to Jim Coughlin and Wendy Nowakunski from Northbridge, and we can loop back to Rich. We'll do that.
Good evening, and thank you very much for taking the time to hear about our proposal. We're very pleased to be presenting to you this evening. My name is Jim Coughlin. I'm here with my partner, as Ned said, Wendy Nowakunski, the founders of Northbridge. We are 30-year executives in the senior housing space, Boston-based. Our office is in Burlington, Massachusetts. And our current portfolio, we started Northbridge in 2004. We've grown that portfolio to 19 communities that span from Massachusetts, Maine, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. The concept that we have proposed is a proposal that we've done in many communities. One of the things that we pride ourselves in as a local developer is that we are in this for the long haul. We're reluctant developers. We are operators by heart. So when we look at a specific opportunity or a site, we recognize what are the nuances to that site, how our offering could be intertwined, what the market needs. And when we assess this opportunity with BI Milton, we saw a void in the market in Milton Place for a dedicated memory care community. We operate 6 other communities like this, one located in Needham, Massachusetts, where we have a very successful partnership with BI Needham. We have another community that's a 70-unit community that would be almost identical to this community that's on the campus of Anna Jakes, which is also part of the BI network. We have a number of communities in Maine that are dedicated memory care, and we also have 2 communities in Plymouth that we partner with BI Plymouth and a community in Burlington, Massachusetts, that we have a very strong relationship with Leahy Clinic. So this is just a general overview of our communities and how they overlay with the BI network. It's been a long-standing relationship. We've seen great outcomes in taking care of our frail seniors in the community, and partnering with the hospital and really focusing on, what is the right approach to addressing the needs of that specific community. When it comes to this site, it very much is akin to our community in Needham, Massachusetts. Very affluent community, very residential, in close proximity to the hospital, not as close as BI Milton, but a lot of the same nuances and development restrictions. When we looked at this opportunity, and we've provided the opportunity for the abutters on Highland Street and beyond to tour this community as an example of our operations. And some folks have taken us up on that, and we'll continue to provide tours. And I would extend the opportunity to town officials as well to just get a general understanding of how we approach memory care and the success that we're having in Needham. The positive impact that we're focused on is that we feel that there's an unmet need in the Milton marketplace for dedicated memory care. This typically has proven to be very much a community asset because most of the residents that we cater to are coming within a 10-mile radius of the community itself, or residents that are moving back to be near their adult children. Typically 60% of the folks are in migrating. They've had a great experience in retirement, but because of the onset of memory care needs or dementia, they are moving closer to their adult children, but there is an association with the community itself. We are a for-profit taxpayer, to be clear, and we do create good quality jobs that, and we're very proud of our care team. Relative to the impact on the community, none of our residents are afforded the opportunity to drive. So one of the reasons I believe BI Milton chose us as a sponsor and partner on this particular site was they were very sensitive to the traffic on Highland Street and beyond. Because our residents don't drive, we are limited to doing or accommodating the traffic generated from visitors and staff itself. We have engaged a traffic study to address this, and we will present that as part of our formal presentation to you. The second component relative to the impact on the community is a sensitive design. I am aware from the process that we went through in pursuing this opportunity that there were much more intensive uses that were presented to the hospital. I believe, and what I've been told is that we were not the most aggressive or the highest bid relative to the site, but the hospital did recognize that we were a smaller footprint, lower profile building that could fit into the site. We've done the analysis of the 10-acre site that we currently have under contract. Only 3.8 acres would be developed, which includes the infrastructure, circulation, and the building itself. As Ned indicated, we have engaged with the abutters and have created a formal process. And I will say that we have been through this process in multiple communities. We find that it's very, very important to engage with our neighbors and address their concerns well before it becomes a public process. This iteration of our 70-unit memory care facility has already been adjusted multiple times to address some of the concerns, increase landscape buffers for abutters, address some of the circulation and recommendations of pervious surfaces as opposed to impervious surfaces to be sensitive to the environment. But again, this is just a preliminary study and a adjustment to has been adjusted multiple times. The model itself is designed in such a way so that we create distinct neighborhoods for our residents. Typically, there's 16 to 20 residents in each neighborhood when you look at the various wings. What that enables us to do is to create more of a home-like environment with dedicated outdoor space and also provide the opportunity to train staff on the nuances of the individual's needs as opposed to just being an institution. It's been a very, as I said, with the onslaught of dementia care demands, it's been a very successful model for us. We'd be happy to answer any specific questions relative to the model or provide you the opportunity to tour one of our communities. That I'll turn it back to you if there's any other specific things.
Ned, I really apologize for my technical difficulties. I think what happened when I raised my hand, I was on my cell phone and I couldn't raise my hand on my cell phone. So I really apologize for that. But if I could just get 2 minutes, just to provide a little context. Sorry to be out of sorts. It's not my first Zoom, I can tell you that. But it's the first one where I've had this much difficulties having people hear me. So thank you all for having me. If I haven't met you, I'm Rich Fernandez. I'm the president of BID Milton. I've been there just over 4 years. And when I got there, we started working with the board on an overall master plan in terms of facility and clinical growth, because we knew we have been serving the town of Milton and Quincy and Randolph for many years and have continued to grow. So we've been embarking on a big master plan, trying to figure out where on our campus we explored this particular property for a number of different things. And in fact, the Quincy urgent care site that we opened up last October was part of this master planning piece, saying that we need to be able to serve and have other high intensity urgent care in the space. So we looked at this property. We've been engaging with the neighbors in the town, trying to figure out what the different options are for over 18 months, actually before COVID started. As Jim has mentioned, we've always been trying to improve the relationship both with the town and the neighbors. So having those conversations, whether it was building a parking lot there or they were fully aware over the last 18 months of our interest to put it on the market and look for potential sellers. So we take that very seriously. And I think Jim and their team have done a tremendous job since then to kind of engaging them. And as he said, modifying the floor plan, et cetera. So again, the process we went through was working with Colliers to put the property on market. As Jim said, we got all kinds of offers. Yes, we got 40B, we got townhomes and others, but our board subcommittee and approval by our board really kind of focused on three things. One, as a board of trustees, they did have a fiduciary responsibility to the hospital to try to balance the finances. Number two, we really wanted to keep and align it with our mission. You know, putting in 25 condos probably doesn't really maximize the best use there. It adds traffic, it's high density, and doesn't solve any other issues. And it really isn't connected to our mission. We really felt the Northbridge memory cares were a tight fit for our mission, and we look forward to collaborating with them on services and caring for their patients as needed. And the third was really trying to solve and meet the town and the neighbors' needs. And quite honestly, Northbridge was one of 3 finalists. Most of the other ones were big national companies that wanted to put 2- and 3-story buildings. Quite honestly, we just knew that wasn't going to fit. And what impressed us, for us, it was 3 things. We had to have a reasonable price. And as Jim mentioned, Northbridge was not the highest bidder. Number 2, had to have a purpose. And I think memory care, as Jim has outlined, is closely aligned with our mission and a big need for this community. And the people is really having Northbridge be both a developer and an operator, and having Jim and Wendy intimately involved from the start of our discussions and proposals all the way through every town meeting tonight and a neighborhood meeting meant a lot to us, because we want to be long-term partners with this well. So that's kind of where we are with this. And obviously, we want to continue to work closely with the town and the neighbors and all of you on the planning board and others to try to come up with a reasonable solution for this particular property. So I know you guys have a long night ahead of you. I'd be happy to answer questions. Maybe I'll turn it over to Ned to close it up, and then we can go from there.
So let me just do a quick orientation with this site plan. I think people recognize, but Highland Street is on the top of the plan. The hospital entry is just to the left off the top of that plan. On the left side of the plan and the south side of the plan, the property is bounded by Winter Valley. And on the easterly side of the plan is a single family owned by Karen Bacardi. She is the only direct residential abutter to this property. There are several abutters, obviously, who are directly across Highland Street and other abutters slightly further out. We have, as I said, met with them 3 times since the selection up to last evening. This was the latest site plan that we showed last night that was responsive to a number of questions and concerns that we heard 2 weeks ago at that neighbor meeting. And so, and we will continue to refine as we hear from them. As I see a process going forward, our goal is to get before town meeting in October. And our goal would be for the planning board to adopt a bylaw recommendation as a planning board recommendation. Between tonight and the end of July, when I believe the select board will be opening warrant for the October town meeting, we have 3 more meetings available to us with the planning board. We are very close to finalizing a draft of a bylaw. It's essentially a red line of the existing bylaw that was put in place in 2013, special permit 13 it's called, assisted living residence development. It was a bylaw that was created for an assisted living plan that was proposed for the horse farm on Randolph Avenue, across Randolph Avenue from the town's DPW yard. That project I actually worked with that developer at the time with the planning board to develop that bylaw. Unfortunately, something happened with the owner. They lost the ability to go forward with the agreement, and that development was never pursued. So it is a robust bylaw. It's got lots of details in it, many of which are appropriate to this location. It does need to be amended because it is fairly specific. In fact, it requires frontage on a state highway, which Randolph Avenue is at that location, but is obviously not here. So we do need some amendments. I do have close to a final redlining of that bylaw that I'll be submitting to Tim and the neighborhood early next week. And we look forward to obviously you having a couple of weeks to review it and time to spend 2 weeks from now, hopefully discussing it. So we would also, I think at some point, it would be benefit to the board to perhaps do a site walk, and we would be ready, willing, and able to host a site walk. If you can go to the next slide, there's one more slide. Yeah, so this is a survey that was done for the hospital in 2017 or 18. There's a significant amount of wetland on the property. There are 2 streams, one that comes parallel to Highland Avenue along most of the frontage, and another stream that comes in from the upper portion of Winter Valley. And they meet, and there's a vernal pool just on the northwesterly middle that defines sort of the wetlands on the property. Most of the dry land is in the area in the middle, and it's a fairly significant topographical change. And then in the upper left corner, where much of the parking is proposed. We will be pursuing in the process sort of parallel approach, very similar to what we're doing or have begun with Winter Valley with the amendment to their zoning that was approved in May. We're seeking zoning amendment that would allow a project of this scale to be developed. It would require a special permit under process to be run by the planning board. In parallel to that, it will require an order of conditions from the Conservation Commission. We're working now on reevaluating, surveying the wetland boundaries, because that work was done 3 or 4 years ago. We need to confirm the location of the wetland boundaries and resurvey that. We'll have that probably in the next 2 months. We'll share that with you. We'll share that with the neighborhood. And as soon as we can, we'll file an abbreviated notice of resource delineation. Basically, a plan that would request the Conservation Commission to confirm what the wetland boundaries are. And that will be key to sort of making sure that the plans as they're developed address setbacks and impacts to wetlands. There'll be robust engineering that will have to take place, deal with stormwater management and the like, all of which would be done as we would be preparing to apply for the special permit and for the order of conditions. So in a sort of a rough look ahead timeframe, we have, we think, 3 meetings with this board where we would hope to be in a position by July 22 for this board to vote to advance a bylaw as a planning board article for consideration at October town meeting. There will be public hearing on that recommendation conducted by the planning board probably sometime in September, I would think. We'll be filing with the Conservation Commission, at least the ANRAD, so that we get the approval and understanding of what the wetland delineation is. And then assuming things go well and town meeting approves an amendment to the bylaw to allow this project to go forward, we'll be digging in real deep with respect to site plan, stormwater management, site civil, architecture, etc. The other thing that we're doing, we promised that the neighbors for the follow-up meeting on the 23rd, 2 weeks from last night, before we come back to you 2 weeks from tonight, is that we'll have some renderings as to what the building will look like from different sides, so that people start to get a sense as to what they're looking at. And we'll be also putting together massing studies to show how the building sits from a massing perspective. The good news is from Ms. Bacardi's property, the building will be 1.5 story at that corner, be 1.5 story, approximately 18 and 19 feet from the ground to the ridge of the roof. So essentially looking at a 1.5 story building with from her perspective. The distances are quite significant through the wetland areas, the protected areas, the treed areas, and the like. The last comment I'll make on the site plan is that the green portion of the roadway, the emergency access portion, will be pervious green surface, so rarely used except in emergency. All deliveries would come in and out of Highland Street and back. The last thing is we do have a meeting scheduled for next week with Winter Valley. The neighbors are invited. I know that Georgia Lee, in particular, as a neighbor, will be present next Tuesday. Neighbors have asked whether Winter Valley would consider allowing access through Winter Valley to this property. That's obviously a decision that Winter Valley would have to consider and make in order to reduce traffic volumes along Highland Street. It's a question that we will ask. I have no idea where they will net out on that, but so that's the process as we go forward. As I said, we'll be delivering a red line version of the existing assisted living bylaw, modified to fit what we think is appropriate here. And we'll look forward to a more in-depth discussion on that with you starting on the 24th. So with that, we'll open it to the board and others for questions and comments. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Ned. I'm trying to digest a lot of those facts. So my understanding is that you're asking for site-specific zoning in 3 meetings prior to having the wetland delineations. Am I correct?
The wetlands may be delineated by the end of July, but the wetlands are specific to site development and not necessarily specific to zoning authorization. So we
But we're
think we
doing
need,
site-specific zoning, and we don't know about where the relationship of where you're placing the buildings to wetlands.
well, we do know where we're placing the building relative to wetlands. We're just confirming where the specific boundaries of those wetlands are, so that we're making sure that the building is certainly well outside the 25-foot no disturb line that's required under the town zoning bylaw, under the town's and the state's storm wetlands bylaw.
And the 100-foot buffers too.
100-foot buffers, there'll be some work within the 100-foot, which is approvable under conditions. There's a 25-foot no disturb line where we can't go, and then beyond that, there's 100-foot, and that is done. Work is done routinely within the 100, subject to conditions that are imposed by the Conservation Commission.
And you're saying you don't know yet about if you're within the 25-foot.
No, we know definitely that we're not within the 25.
But you think you're within the 100-foot buffer.
There'll be some work within the 100, no question. And
All right,
we'll file the appropriate notice of intent with the Conservation Commission if and when after zoning is passed. That'll be an act that would take place after zoning is passed. Same time that we'll be filing for the special permit if after zoning is passed.
Now, Winter Valley was a unique situation in that I think the town was in a really big hurry to get some affordable units. There was a history with Winter Valley in that this would just be a continuation, that would be just a continuation of Winter Valley's sort of housing and et cetera. I just want to state that, in my opinion, this is a little bit different because this is a brand new site. I'm not quite sure I understand the urgency for rushing the zoning this quickly. But I will open it up to hear from the other planning board members. And then I'd be very interested to hear from the public as well. So does anyone want to chime in now, or should I call names?
Well, I can chime in.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Yes. Thank you, all of you, for your presentation. I generally am supportive of this use on this site. It looks like you operate some lovely facilities. Having experienced memory care issues with my mother and mother-in-law, I appreciate this kind of facility. And I do think there's a need for it. And so I do appreciate that. I do have a few questions and comments. And one concern, particularly the last comment that Ned Corcoran mentioned about access through Winter Valley and how that might be influenced by community input. Because Winter Valley, as Denny mentioned, has just been granted zoning change that would allow additional units to be built there. But just next door to that also are pending 40B projects. And so there is a lot of new development in a very short distance of Canton Avenue. And I'm quite concerned about adding another development within the same proximity to these two other developments without having that neighborhood engaged in the process. So that would be a different neighborhood, I think, than you've been engaged with thus far. And so I also would be interested to see what the traffic study would be like for both places, not just on Highland or just on Canton, but the two locations, and if it were somehow split. And part of that, I think, has to do with I saw that you have 64 parking spaces, I think, in the plan. And you mentioned 80 jobs. And so I would like to understand how the staffing works. So when are people coming and going? Because Canton Avenue is a particularly commuter driven, but it's also school driven in terms of hours of congestion. I happen to know because I live on Canton Avenue close to this location, so I have personal experience as well. But we've heard a lot of testimony about this because of the Winter Valley and because of the 40B. And so I do think it's important to understand when people are coming to work. And if there's, I imagine there's shift changes and, you know, if there's some thought about people using any other form of transportation besides a single occupant car to get to work. If you have any experience with that. I know the hospital has parking on their facility, and I don't know if you see any cross sharing of parking, but that's the sort of thing when you come back. And I would like to understand when you expect to come back with the traffic study in terms of timing, because I do think that's an important thing for our consideration in terms of, you know, the time frame in which Ned laid out that you'd like to move this forward. And the other thing that's related to the traffic that I'd like a little information about is what your service needs are. So, you know, I'm sure you have food service, so that means delivery, and there's trash generated. Hopefully you do some composting. But what other kinds of, I'm sure there's some kind of linen service for bedding and other things. So I would like to understand what that is like. So what kind of truck traffic people might expect, and what kind of frequency and timing, you know, if there's limits that you set on when people can come and do those deliveries. And then I know this is something that when Ned Corcoran and I had a conversation some time ago about this, and I just don't, it wasn't expressed tonight, so I think it would be helpful if you just express it again, that these units wouldn't add to our total unit count in terms of our subsidized housing inventory. And therefore, it wouldn't change our denominator. I think, you know, we're very sensitive to adding units without at least keeping pace, you know, with our 10%. So I don't know if there's any discussion that you want to have about affordability, whether you're going, the bylaw that you referenced does have some requirement for some affordability. I didn't know if you were going to try and revise that or stick with that. So that was something else I'm hoping you'll address.
Sure, I can take a stab at a couple, and then, so on the issue of the Canton Avenue access, it's not something that we're interested, at least Northbridge is interested in doing. Their interest is in using access to and from Highland Street. It was something that we were asked to ask. I'm not sure that Winter Valley wants to take that on either, because of additional traffic volumes that could affect how their location operates, but that's something obviously they need to consider, and we agreed that we would ask the question. From that, as I understand on the affordability, there is no impact on the SHI. The units are not considered residential units for purposes of either numerator or denominator associated with the subsidized housing inventory. It's a separate product. It is not considered for this purpose. There is a provision in the existing bylaw that requires a 5% affordability component. It's an asset-based consideration as opposed to an income-based, and that was something that was put into the bylaw when it was enacted in 2013. Northbridge is aware of it. They're committed, I think, in their agreements to pursue to meet that standard, and would do that going forward. But the town would not get the benefit of those 5% from an affordability perspective, nor would it be burdened by the 70 units being added to the denominator.
But would there be some effort to have some units that are more affordable than market rates would be? Would there be some, have you done that in your other facilities?
Jordan, I can speak to that. So yes, we are looking to have a minimum of 5% of the affordability of the units be affordable. And that would be on the the rental portion of the monthly cost associated with living at Avita Milton. And specific to what Ned was saying earlier regarding the makeup, the units themselves don't contain any cooking or kitchen areas, which I believe is a disqualifier to be included in the affordable units in the town of Milton. The units are typically one room with a private bathroom with no cooking area because of the nature of the population. And so that itself is a disqualifier. And then specific to deliveries, we have reviewed some of our standard practices with the neighbors, and most of the, for a building this size with only 70 apartments, most of the deliveries will be made using a box truck type of vehicle. So if the entrance was to remain in Highlands, the deliveries would come through the driveway. We do not have a porta cochere here so that the trucks can come in. They're going to be like a WB Mason truck or a FedEx truck or UPS truck. The deliveries associated with food deliveries, which is generally our largest vendor, would come here, back into here, and again, would not be an 18-wheeler. We've already spoken to the neighbors, and as Jim and Wendy have shared with them, we have deliberate language that we put into all of our contracts to ensure that we're meeting the size of the trucks for the neighbors that we've promised. So they would not be 18-wheelers here, and the delivery times would be during a non-busy time for this section of town. And specific to the staff, generally speaking, you are not getting a ton of visitors. A ton of residents driving here. It's a change of shifts, range from 6 to 2, 7 to 3, 8 to 4. A majority is at 9 to 5, 3 to 11, and 11 to 7. And generally at one time during the busiest time of the day, we have 30 people in the building. That's generally between 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. and the comings and goings are spread quite equally. So there isn't a mass change of shift coming at one particular time. It really is spread out throughout the first 4 hours of the day between 6 and 10. Was there something else that I missed on your question, Cheryl?
Just if you have any carpooling, car sharing, public transit kind of initiatives as a company, go ahead, sorry.
Sure. So we do have a senior green program, and so we do want to try to, residents, whether they have memory care or not, need memory care or not, really are looking to give back to their grandkids and their kids. And so we do try to harness all initiatives that are related to our senior green program. We do composting, and we do have a garden on site that we pull from, whether it's the herbs that we use throughout the summer and winter in our kitchens, or tomatoes and other vegetables that we grow on site. But we're willing to take a look at it, and we call ourselves the next generation of senior living, and that speaks to some of the stuff that we've done and are always looking at new ways to improve upon that program.
And I would just add, Shirley, your comment about potentially leveraging the offsite parking in the shuttle that we use for employees. We honestly haven't talked about that, but I can brief Jim and the Northbridge team. There might be a possibility to augment their parking. So there's a shuttle coming, dropping 10 people off, and they're parking offsite to take traffic away from that high impact area. So we'll make a note of that.
Great, thank you. Just if you could address that when you address you folks come back with the traffic study, just kind of some of these other options or alternatives that might be possible. Thank you
for
that.
Sure. Just one other comment on the linen. So all of our tables are dressed without a cloth, tablecloth and cloth napkins. And so our linens are limited to just those items only. The sheets, towels, all that is brought by the resident. We do wash it on site. So there's really minimal linens that's coming and going, and that typically would be done, delivered through a box truck as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So this is Denny. I did have another question. I'm sorry, Cheryl, were you done? I didn't mean to interrupt. Did you have
no,
more?
that's all for now. Thank you, Denny.
Oh, good, thank you. I was wondering, are the roadways or parking within the 25 no build zone?
Yes,
Ned?
no, there will be a crossing that would be required right at that location to cross over to this other upland.
So it would cross wetlands at one point,
That's correct.
but not along the rest of it. And none of the car parking in the other area is within the 25, is it within the 100-foot buffer?
I'm assuming it's within the 100-foot, but it's certainly not within the 25.
Okay. Anyone else on the planning board want to speak to this? Questions, comments?
I'm just interested, I look forward to doing a site walk. And if you are able to stake off where the boundaries are of the buildings prior to the site walk, it's really helpful when we do that. This is a scenic roadway and really a residential. Highland Street is except for the hospital, is a residential neighborhood. So I'm just concerned with, preserving the streetscape and the trees that are along the front, and keeping and being very sensitive to the other neighbors that really, I think want to keep it feeling residential. So, but it
Good
looks
news
kind of
there,
lovely.
Meredith, is that all of the frontage substantially, except where the access comes in currently, is substantially wet and is not touchable. So there's nothing in that area. There are no trees that would be removed. There might be some infill along the edge of the roadway to enhance the trees, but there would be no change to the appearance of the front of the property along Highland Street.
And Meredith, I can just add to what Ned just said. From this area of Highland to the front door, this is just shy of 300 feet, so a football field. And this, from this area to this corner of the building is roughly about 160 feet. And so there will be substantial trees that would stay where they are now. We try to nestle our properties into the landscape versus clear cutting and having them seen from the road.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Rich or Kathleen?
I just thanks very much for the presentation. And I do think that it is a use that we probably need in Milton. And I can understand that there may not be the same kind of traffic impacts as some of the other 40B projects that we have in the area, because these people will be driving. But I look forward to, having issues tonight with getting kicked off of Zoom and coming back on Zoom. So I'll have to watch this presentation again, but I think it's a use that we need, and I appreciate the fact that it doesn't affect the SHI, but because these units are not counted as housing units, they're medical units. So it doesn't have that sort of an impact for us. So I look forward to hearing more about the project as this goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Rich, did you have any questions or comments? We're probably going to continue this.
No, nothing to repeat. So.
Okay, thank you, Rich.
Thanks.
Penny, can I make one request?
Yes.
A site plan that's a context plan that shows this property in relationship to Winter Valley and to Canton Avenue, the Winter Valley access to Canton Avenue into the 40Bs on Canton Avenue, just so we can understand the overall context of the amount of development being proposed in such a small area when we're talking about access and traffic. And the traffic study might want to consider those new developments as well, not just the existing conditions, because that could be a pretty significant difference.
That's right. I think that's a great idea, Cheryl. Thank you. Okay. I would entertain a motion to continue this. Is that the right approach, Tim?
I mean, this isn't a public hearing, so
Oh, right. Okay.
if everyone agrees that we'll want to have this item as a future agenda item, we can just make sure that happens.
Okay, sure.
We would request the opportunity to be back before you in 2 weeks, and we'll have a lot of new information to you by the end of next week.
That's great. Thank you, Ned. I don't know that I need to do a motion for that. I think we can just arrange that with Tim. Is that okay, Tim?
That works for me.
Oh, great. Thank you. All right. So, so thank you, Mr. Corcoran, and thank you, BID Milton, for coming before us and providing us with such. good-
Jenny, sorry, I said that was last, but I have one last thing. I would be
Okay.
interested in a tour of the Needham facility, so if that is something that could be set up and worked on in terms of a date, that would be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that for you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to follow Tim's advice and jump around here. We're going to go to old business of Walcott Woods, so that we can let other people who are in attendance go home a little bit earlier than keeping them through some other important topics. So Tim, did you want to give us a quick update and then we'll.
Yes, I'm just promoting folks
Oh,
who
okay.
need to be promoted. So we discussed this just to sort of give people the kind of I did send a memo on behalf of the planning staff late this afternoon. This is something that Alice and I worked on together today. But just by way of background, in April of 2019, Planning Board approved a special permit for a Great Estates PUD development at the Carberry Estate, colloquially known as Walcott Woods, 54 townhouse units on however many acres down there. And one of the requirements of the special permit is that the condominium documents be approved by both town council and the planning board. So that is one of the requirements, and that's what we're here today to discuss. We had this on the agenda last week. There were some questions and some disagreements about the nature of the age restriction requirements in excuse me, in those condominium documents. The board did take a vote to approve. That vote was a tie, given the even split in members, Denny, in your absence. And so no action was taken. Northland and representatives of a group of abutters who were have been a part of this discussion since prior to the zoning, we're encouraged to continue discussing, those areas of concern around the age restriction items in those condominium documents. Since then, and this is basically the basis of my memo, I'll just lead with this and then we'll let Northland and their attorneys kind of, give us a status report. It's our opinion as a staff, based on our reading of the special permit, that the special permit says 55 plus as an age restriction, and really doesn't go any further into any other types of restrictions or specificity on visitation or what the nature of occupancy sort of means. And so it's a limiting factor on kind of what we believe the planning board's kind of scope is on these sorts of things. And so, given that fact, as it relates to the modifications to the condominium documents that were submitted late in the game prior to the last planning board meeting, given those modifications, and also I think given, and this is more related to sort of the planning aspect of all this as opposed to the legal kind of aspect of it.
Oh, we lost your volume. Come back, Tim.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back now.
Okay,
Thank
sorry.
you. I just missed your last sentence.
I was going to say, given all of the, and this is something that's gone a little bit missing from the conversation, given all of the site planning and design elements that were discussed both through the zoning process and the special permit process, that I think were very specifically drafted to mitigate negative impacts on the abutters of this project. It's the opinion of staff that as modified, that the requirements in these condominium documents are consistent with the special permit, which I think at the end of the day is what the planning board is here to decide. That opinion is kind of based on our read from a planning perspective, and also our conversations with town council about kind of what the scope of the planning board's authority is, and also kind of the nature of the modifications that have been made. I know that Matt Gaines, who is the attorney for Northland on this matter, as well as Anthony Cicchello, who is attorney representing some of the abutters, have both been in contact with town council on this issue. And given that they're both attorneys, I'm going to actually ask them to kind of speak a little bit more towards some of those legal things. But I think, Denny, if you'll indulge them, I think it would be good to hear from Northland at this point.
Okay, I'd be happy to hear from Northland. And then Tony Cicchello. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Matt Gaines. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Marcus Arrico, Emmer and Brooks. And as Tim said, we represent Northland and their development entity here, Walcott Residential. While we felt the original set of condominium documents that we submitted to the planning board, I think at this point, 6 weeks or more now, complied with the special permit in the zoning bylaw. Some issues were raised by Attorney Cicchello on behalf of his client. So we submitted some changes. Admittedly, they were submitted only a few hours before the meeting on May 27th. And again, why I don't think those changes were necessary, just for sort of belts and suspenders, just to make sure we were fully compliant. We did submit those changes on May 27th. And hopefully again, they were submitted only a few hours before the last meeting. So I understand why some members may not have had a chance to fully review them or fully digest them. Hopefully you have at this point. They are pretty basic, and I know that Stephen Gallagher from Northland had sort of resent them over to Tim today. So hopefully you got a chance to review them. Long story short, I can quickly run through what those changes were. And there was a language added that states that, well, I should say there was already language that you could not change the use of a room in a unit to make it into an additional bedroom without the prior consent of the condominium trustees. We've now added that in addition, you can't change a room into a bedroom without the prior approval of the planning board. In addition, we added that to the extent permitted by law, once a unit is sold by the developer, no unit shall be altered to convert interior space into an additional bedroom. The maximum number of bedrooms for each unit shall be the number of bedrooms reflected on the plans, basically when the condominium was created. So there was some concern that, well, people could add bedrooms and that could expand the units. So we've taken care of that. You can't add any more bedrooms unless obviously the planning board were to approve it. The other, and this is probably the biggest change we made, is on the over 55 language. The original language that we had stated that all units shall be subject to an age restriction, that they must be occupied by someone, at least one person 55 or older, or their spouses or domestic partners of any age. So obviously under our original language, that would have allowed, one spouse who was perhaps 58 with a spouse who was 54 to own and live in the unit. And again, the abutters raised objection to that and said it was not compliant with the permit and the zoning bylaw. So we have revised that language, and now it just simply states all dwelling units shall be subject to an age restriction, limiting dwelling units to the use and occupancy by persons age 55 or older, period. So now all owners, both husband and wife or whatever their marital or domestic partner status might be, they both must be over the age of 55. And as Tim indicated, that is really what the permit and the bylaw says. So clearly, to the extent we were in compliance before, in my opinion, we are most certainly in compliance now. On the guest visitation issue, clearly, I don't think anyone would expect that, people can't have guests come and visit them who happen to be under 55, whether it is friends, maybe someone is, 56 and their best friend is 52 and they want to come and visit them for a weekend and spend a couple of nights. Or the more likely scenario is that you have, some folks who are empty nesters, their kids went off to college and they come home for the summer. The kids are 20, 22, whatever they may be, and they're home for the summer. I think it is, totally expected that obviously those children would live with their parents for that time. I can tell you, and I mentioned this to the other board members who were on the call 2 weeks ago, but for the chair's edification, our office, I would say 80% of our billable hours in our client base is representing condominium associations. While we happen to represent Northland here, who is a developer, most of our work is representing condominiums. We represent over 4,000 condominiums, mostly almost all in Massachusetts. And a good chunk of those are over 55 condominiums. I mention this to you because in my 13 years at this firm, I've read thousands of sets of condominium documents, and probably many of those are for over 55s. And the language that we have included here with respect to guest visitation for people who are under 55, which states no more than 12 consecutive weeks and no more than an aggregate of 12 weeks in the course of a calendar year, is the industry standard. It is very much the language that I have seen time and time again at over 55 condominiums in Massachusetts. And again, that is always sort of how it's done. And there's an expectation, obviously, that owners can have their college age or otherwise children stay there for some amount of time, but obviously they're not permanent residents of that place. The other change was sort of some of the other edits were just sort of in line with that. We had some terms in here about, a non-age qualified occupant. That was with the older language. So we've just deleted that in a couple of sections. And the only other change we made, there was language that's originally said that to the extent permissible under law, no unit may be occupied by more than 2 persons per bedroom plus 1 additional person. And by way of illustration, a 2-bedroom unit may be occupied by up to 5 persons. We have amended that to take out the plus 1 additional person. So now it just simply reads, to the extent permissible under law, no unit may be occupied by more than 2 persons per bedroom, period. By way of illustration, a 2-bedroom unit may be occupied by up to 4 persons. So that was the other change, again, to attempt to limit the occupants to the unit. So those are the edits we made. Attorney Chiquella did send over some additional changes that he was requesting on behalf of his clients yesterday. I did review them and discuss them with my client. And unfortunately, we really can't agree to any of them. I think what we've already submitted is more than enough of a compromise. And as I mentioned to Attorney Chiquella when I spoke to him and when I spoke to town council, in my opinion, what Attorney Chiquella has proposed, and I understand he's obviously being a zealous advocate for his clients, but in my opinion, what he's proposing is unreasonable / well beyond the industry standard on one hand. And I guess some of the changes I would say fall into that bucket. And some of the other changes I would say fall into a bucket that they're simply trivial or unnecessary. It's rewording something, it's putting the language that's not there, sort of superfluous language or redundant language. So in my opinion, what we have submitted as a revised language fully complies with the permit and the zoning bylaw. And as Tim indicated, that is really your scope here to make sure that that is the case. To the extent there's any violations down the line, once this place is up and running, as you know, the planning board is not the zoning enforcement officer of the town. You have your building commissioner and everything. So if there's any issues down the line, that's how it would get handled. So those are really all my comments. Steve, and Steve Gallagher is here from Northland. Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I said.
Not much. I think you pretty much covered it. I would just basically say that, in terms of the big picture, this has been 6 weeks. We submitted it to town council about 6 weeks ago. He had 2 weeks to review it. The board did have an additional 2 weeks. And now there's been another 2 weeks beyond that. So I do think that there's been enough time for everyone to look at this. And based on the back and forth, based on Attorney Chiquella's email yesterday, I think it's clear at this point that everyone is on the same page regarding the 55 plus bylaw and the 55 plus portion of the special permit, which really are the things that were at issue initially. So to the extent that we were out of compliance, which I dispute, in which frankly, Milton Town Council disputes also, we clearly are not. So that issue is basically off the table. And the things that we don't agree on are things that are not addressed in the zoning or the special permit at all. They're just some of the many provisions that are included in any condominium association documents. And as Matt said, all of these provisions that we have, the ones that are still in dispute apparently, are totally standard things. And what we're being asked to do is to edit them to be far more restrictive than they would normally be done in almost any other condominium association. So there's no obligation for us to do that. There's nothing in the zoning, there's nothing in the special permit that requires us to do it. It would be unreasonable for our buyers, for the community. And so we're comfortable with where the documents are right now, and we'd like to get them voted on and approved.
If I just add one more thing, and obviously Attorney Chikello can speak for himself, but when we did speak earlier, he did indicate to me both in email and when we spoke that the changes that we have made are acceptable to him and his clients. He obviously wants additional changes on top of that, and that's what we find unacceptable. And as Stephen indicated, I said they were unreasonable. I would even go as far as to say that one or two of them would actually potentially make the units unmarketable and frankly unsellable. So, and again, I can't repeat it enough. It's far beyond the scope of your review here. So with that, I will happy to take any questions or proceed as you would like.
Jenny, may I ask a question of Mr. Gaines?
Yes.
You mentioned your experience in representing condominiums of over 55. So in that experience, have you had this type of experience with the planning board and review of condominium documents and with neighbors council review of your clients' condominium documents? Just curious if this is kind of an unusual circumstance.
It is, absolutely. There is frequently when you have condominiums that are developed by special permit, even not even over 55 condominiums, but just regular ones, there is language in there that says the planning board, prior to the issuance of a building permit or certificate of occupancy, the planning board shall approve the condo docs. But it is, and I just did it 2 weeks ago for a condominium down in Swansea. It was not an over 55. It was just a 14 unit with actually a built pursuant to a comprehensive permit, I believe. And again, they just really did a quick read through and said, yep, this checks the box on a couple of the conditions in the permit. We clearly see that you have the affordability in here. Thanks. Have a nice day. And, it was in time and time again, when I've seen this, that is usually the process for a planning board to approve condominium documents. I've never seen in my experience in the butters or butters attorney chiming in on objections to condominium documents.
Thank you.
Okay, I wasn't here last time, so I wasn't able to comment. So you said a number of comments tonight. And I just want to tell you that it's a little bit in my craw because I paid really close attention during the whole entire process years before you got involved. And the citizens and the boards were told, quote, age restricted 55 plus, period. That was it. And a lot of concessions were granted from numerous boards, the warrant committee, the select board, the planning board, town meeting. And they were all based on 55 plus, period. And I can't even tell you the number of concessions and the thought that went into it. And to sort of say, well, of course, college kids are going to stay there, when it was stated that college kids were not going to be staying there. It was clearly and explicitly during community meetings and various meetings before various committees. It was not expected that college kids would be spending the summer there because the developer told the community that they would not be spending any significant amount of time there. So that, I think, is some background that I don't know that you're aware of. So it's just, I can understand why the community reacted the way they did. And I do understand that the documents were given 6 weeks ago, but it would have been a good idea to flag that you were trying to change the 55 plus language that would have been completely inconsistent to all of the community work and meetings and agreements that were built one on top of another for years. So I also think it's a real shame that neighborhoods have to hire attorneys to deal with these things and to set them straight. But I'd like to hear from the other side, unless other planning board members.
I see that Jack Dolly, who is the president of Northland, who I think was probably at every single one of those meetings you attended, is now on. Jack, I don't know if you want to respond to that comment or anything, or
may I?
Madam Chair?
Yes, of course.
Madam Chair, I couldn't disagree with what you just stated more strongly. I spent 2 years in front of every single committee and community neighborhood group in the prosecution and promotion of a zoning bylaw and the subsequent special permit process, and never once was it stated in any of those meetings by me or Ned Corcoran, who were the only two people at those meetings, that nobody less than 55 years of age would occupy one of these houses. That is a gross.
That's not what I said.
It is what you said.
I didn't say nobody.
You
We
just
talked about college
characterized,
kids.
excuse me, you just characterized the process as leading down to a result that no family member less than 55 years of age could reside in one of these houses. I never in my wildest dreams would have committed to anything that would have prohibited my 53-year-old wife from living with me in one of these homes, nor would I have committed to anything that would have prevented my 26 or 27-year-old daughter from coming home and spending time with her mother and father, whether it be during COVID, whether it be for a summer, whether it be for graduate school.
Well, our memories
The
serve differently, and I've
conversation,
heard from a
excuse
number
me,
of people.
excuse
who-
me,
Can I
Madam Chair,
step
I have the
Denny, can I
floor.
make a comment?
Yeah.
Excuse me, I have the floor.
Actually, you're not on the board, and I do have a comment. I just don't like the way this is going here. I mean, we do have a this is going, the tone of this meeting is really going awry, and I'd really like us to get back on track, or I don't personally want to take part in it.
I respect that.
No, I'd like the tone to just come down. This is
Okay, I will bring it down, but when I am accused of something that is so incorrect, by both the chair of this board and the attorney for the neighborhood, and for, in a sense, lying to the board during the process that I spent 3 years going through, I can't tolerate that. I won't accept it. So I'm sorry if I'm angry. I'm sorry if I'm emotional, but I have permitted the two best projects in this town. And to be characterized as I have 2 weeks ago, and as I just was, I'm sorry, I won't allow that to happen. So
Our memories serve us differently, but I do recall that there was going to be no significant amount of time spent by college kids. That's my memory of at least one meeting.
You're
But
incorrect. I'm sorry.
And I'm
Penny?
sorry, I've heard from others who recall it the way that I recall it as well.
Madam Chair,
But
you're
I think-
incorrect. I'm sorry.
Well,
Denny,
I'm-
may I respond to what Rich's comment was and circle back to what the way Tim framed this tonight? And I think it's really important for us to think about our role as planning board members here. And our role in reviewing this ties back to the special permit. It does not tie back to those earlier discussions. And I just want to, I think it will help us stay focused if we kind of keep that framework that Tim established at the outset as our framework. I think I asked this at the last meeting, and I asked him to talk with town council so that we don't venture beyond what our authority and our responsibility is here. And, I've been on the board 6 years, but into the 7th now. And, we have reviewed condominium documents in the past, but it's really at a very, very basic level, to the extent that they meet the same requirements or conditions that were put in the special permit. And where we don't have anything in the special permit describing age 55, and town council has advised us that the language meets the requirements in our special permit. I think that's the guidance we need to go with. We always.
I think you're right. I think after we hear
Yeah.
from Tony, I think we should follow that guidance. Let's get to
Okay.
Tony because it's getting late.
Can I
Thank
make
you.
a comment after that, Denny?
Oh, please, no, Rich, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I just,
Thank you.
so, just sitting back and listening to how this has gone so far. I mean, so I did chair the last meeting, and I specifically said, and I do take pause with some of these comments here, because I said very specifically And if anybody wants to go back and watch the video, I'm quite positive in what I said. I was not making any determination or making any statement on what my feeling was on either side. I specifically said this was something new that came to us, regardless of when it went to the planning board and when it went to our lawyer. This was something very recent to us. And I heard from a neighborhood that hired a lawyer that wanted to see it waited for 2 weeks. I stand by that. I see no problem with that. And the way that just, no offense to folks, but the way this just started this meeting was extremely defensive and it didn't need to be. All we really needed to see is what happened during those 2 weeks. And we could have moved this forward very, very quickly. I take issue with a lot of the attitude on this call right now, because quite honestly, I was very specific last time. Cheryl, to your comments just now, we didn't venture anywhere. I said, yes, I'm hearing a neighborhood asking us to wait because they just got it. I absolutely stand by that comment. And you know what? Folks did reach out to our attorney, and I have not heard that I was outside of bounds on that. And so if we should have a meeting at some point soon with our attorney to talk about that, because there has been nothing we have done so far that has contradicted any of our authority on this board. And quite honestly, I'm going to stop there, but we're here.
No, you were absolutely correct, and town council agreed with you. Town council hadn't even had an opportunity to review the changes that were presented a few hours beforehand.
Yeah,
So,
a suggestion, just to let me finish, Cheryl, a suggestion, usually when you come to this board, it's not the smartest thing to just launch right into what our authority is, because, we have been talking to town council. We do know what our authority is. This didn't need to go that long tonight. And so, I take very much issue with the attitudes on this call right now. So
I think maybe you
if
misunderstood.
you want my vote to go forward tonight,
Maybe you
I suggest we turn
misunderstood
the corner.
my comments, Rich, because my comments weren't directed at you whatsoever. My comments were tried to redirect our conversation back to the way Tim framed it, which was that town council has advised us, as we asked, what our authority is and what we should be looking at here with respect to the condo docs.
Yep.
And I think it wasn't
I don't know,
100%
Cheryl.
clear.
If anybody
to
wants to,
me.
if anybody wants to say what our lawyer is telling us, we should bring the lawyer on the call, because in a lot of meetings we get opinions on what our legal position is. And quite honestly, after we go talk to our lawyer, we hear different things. And so I suggest in the future, we just check with our lawyers first and then come back.
yeah, I agree with you. Okay, let's hear from Tony Chichello. It's getting late. So I'd like to thank you very much. Very good points all around.
And I would speak after Tony Chichello, please.
Okay. All right, do we have Mr. Chichello?
Yes, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So my name's Tony Chichello. As you know, I represent Jack Weeks, John McPhee, and Matt Hyatt, who are abutters and parties that have been integrally involved in this project for quite a long time. The last time I was here, I recounted the history of what got us here. It was pretty unfortunate. There were aborted, unsuccessful efforts to change a zoning amendment. We were advised they were withdrawn. There was a modification of condo docs that were submitted in draft and then resubmitted with changes drawn to no one's attention, not town council, not the neighbors. And the changes put in the precise language that was to be part of the failed and withdrawn efforts to change the zoning. Let's move beyond that. But the context is important because you're being asked to check your common sense at the door. So we did see some concessions from the developer. And as Attorney Gaines has pointed out, we agree that those concessions are appropriate. And to the extent that they strike out the non-age qualified occupant and the references and paragraphs relating to that, those changes are fine. But let's be clear and let's understand what we're talking about here. We've heard a lot about what's standard, what's typical, etc. Be clear. What's in our zoning And what's in our special permit is not typical. What's typical is what lines up with a federal statute that's an exemption from the Fair Housing Act, HOPA. It allows developers to have an over 55 development, which is defined as one with an age qualified occupant and anybody else they want in there. And there are a variety, there are other conditions. They have to do the verification that they're doing here. And only 80% of the units have to be age qualified. But what's clear is you can be more restrictive in HOPA. And we were in this special permit and in the zoning. So look at the language of the zoning. All right, let's start with the zoning. Paragraph 4, which talks about housing types and occupancy. Occupancy of units that are developed on site shall be limited to persons who are 55 years of age or over. That does not include Mr. Dolly's wife. And I'm not trying to personalize this, but I'm trying to be clear. It doesn't include college students. It includes, unless they're 55. The language in the special permit is also clear. To provide added diversity of housing types, attractive households for desirous of downsizing from larger single-family dwellings and whose occupancy shall be limited to persons aged 55 or over. So I think that the concessions they made on eliminating the non-age qualified resident are appropriate and necessary for them to meet the zoning. But what they're now asking you to do is get through the back door of calling it a guest, the college student. Now, Mr. Dolly has his college students. I have a college student. My son lives with me. He goes off to college for a semester, lives in the dorm, and then he comes back and he's at my house. But his driver's license says he's got to live at my house. He gets his mail at my house to the extent the kids get mail. He's totally financially dependent on me. He has nowhere else to go. When I go visit my parents for a day or a week or a month, I have a house to come home to. I don't live there. I'm a real guest there. What you're being asked to do here is to check your common sense at the door and rewrite the zoning and the special permit in exactly the way they were going to file to do twice at 2 special town meetings last year. So this is not a time to check your common sense at the door. Your task under these condo documents is to ensure that they're consistent with the special permit and the zoning. And what's clear is that a college student that lives with their parents is an occupant. What's clear is that a Milton Academy boarding student who boards at school and lives with his parent the rest of the time is an occupant. And you can make that determination as the planning board, and you should. I had a series of other, what I consider more minor questions. I am concerned about an enforcement mechanism that's $50 a day. And I'm especially concerned because no one here appears to really want to enforce the 55-year-old age restriction. And $50 a day is a lot cheaper than a hotel, and it's a lot cheaper than buying an apartment. So why not just live there? So that clearly should be adjusted. The language on the caregiver, I agree in principle. The language there is very sloppy and should be tightened up. And I provided council language that's tighter, more appropriate, and lets him do everything he wants in that regard. And it's been turned back. I had a number of other comments to tighten up language where it was a little sloppy. You know, town council and town council in one respect said the areas that we said that the planning board has the authority to enforce it, they were listed elsewhere. I could live with that. But I think you as a planning board need not approve condo documents that rewrite the zoning and the special permit. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll stop there because I know it's late.
Thank you, Tony. I'll let Kathleen have questions or comments.
Yes,
Open up to
I
others.
do.
Sure.
I do. I have been practicing real estate law for 40 years. I haven't read as many condominium documents as Matt Gaines, but I've come pretty close. And I have done 40B projects that are over 55. I've done other projects that are over 55. And I agree with the letter that the memo that town council has provided that says that our limitation is just a minor sign off on these condominium documents to say, yes, they satisfy the provisions of the special permit, which does not go into huge detail. And these condominium documents with the amendment that was made a few weeks ago satisfies my reading of that special permit and my reading of the zoning. Mr. Cichello and his clients have other options if they want to challenge the issuance of this, the special permit. They could have gone to court. This is not the place, the planning board and proving these condo documents is not the place for him to be raising these kinds of objections. He has other methods to do that. And that's not our job here. Our job is to say, okay, fine, we issued a special permit in accordance with the zoning, but we issued a special permit, read the special permit. What does it say we are supposed to be doing? And what we're supposed to be doing here is signing off on the condo documents or not to say whether they satisfy the over 55 requirements. And in my opinion, as I've expressed at the last meeting, is that they do, especially with the changes that have just been made. Issues about how the caretakers are handled, how college kids or some person that you have visiting are all part of the operation of the condominium, and the enforcement lies with the condominium association and the owners in that condominium. It's not the planning board's job to go to court on this. It's not the town's job to go to court on this. That's what condos are all about. And that's why you have an association. And that's why the language is in there about the enforcement. And it's all in there about the fact that any unit owner could decide to sue another unit owner if they are not happy about the fact that there's some kid living there. That's not our job. And we shouldn't be having our building inspector be doing bed checks. That's just not his job. And so reading the special permit, town council has given us the opinion that our review of this is extremely limited. And I think that we should be just following that provision.
All right. Okay, I didn't know if Mr. Chicago wanted to respond to that, or do we want to
Can
go
I
back?
make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Rich.
Sorry, I just, again, I have to say it's interesting because there's a lot of assumptions on what folks feel. So we're fighting something that hasn't happened yet. I just want to let folks know that. I also, and this is more directed at staff, with obviously utmost respect, Tim, when we are sitting at a table in the room, I know we're at different times, but when we're at the table, the chair runs these meetings and people don't speak unless their hand's raised. They also don't get invited to the table unless the chair recognizes them. And so, just moving forward, I would really appreciate it if, before we start adding people to the meeting, before any of that happens, we really need to start directing that to the chair. That's my opinion. I don't know if Denny would agree to it. My other feeling is we need to, I'm not sure how long we're going to be on Zoom, but if these Zoom meetings get extended, we really need to figure out how we get back to raising a hand. I will just state this, and hopefully we can move forward. And obviously, Denny, at your discretion of talking further, but this was not something that folks that are watching this meeting should be pretty saddened to have watched this. We've got elected officials that are volunteers, that we spend countless hours doing this, and we think we're doing the right thing for all, right? We've got neighbors that come to us and want us to listen to them, and we do try to give them that opportunity. I think all of us around the table know what our responsibility is. We all are able to reach out to town council, and we do, and we listen to them. And so, just my feeling, you're a developer or lawyer coming to this table, probably not the smartest thing to do is to stand on a box and tell us what our job is, because trust me, we do know what it is. Secondly, I do not appreciate anybody coming to this meeting and yelling at one of the people on here, especially the chair. I seriously think folks should think about that hard. That was a terrible thing to watch, in my opinion. So I'm really hoping we can hurry up with this one.
Thank you, Rich. I very much appreciate your feedback and your input on that. So onward. Okay, does anyone, let's see, Tony, did you want to respond, and then we can close the public hearing on this?
Yes, just briefly. The issue of the interpretation of what an occupant is, and whether or not the definition of a guest is in conflict with that definition of an occupant, or an end run around that definition of an occupant, is squarely within your authority to review and determine. Now, everybody's talked about what town council said, and I had a discussion with town council today, and I left with the understanding that it was the job of the planning board to determine what was reasonable and what was consistent with the language of the special permit and the zoning. Your job. And I understand in the ordinary course, your review of condominium documents is relatively perfunctory. And I also recognize that for experienced land use counsel, they usually don't see this language that we have in our zoning, because usually it's a looser language that just requires one person to be under 55. And under those circumstances, of course, it makes sense that your college student can come home. By definition, they can. This is very different. This is a situation in which the documents from top to bottom, the representations from top to bottom were that this was an over 55 development. And it says limited to occupants over 50, occupants are limited to persons over 55. That's the difference. I'm going to stop now because I'm probably repeating myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chicallo. All right. I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Madam Chair, it's not a
Yes.
public hearing, so there's
Okay. Oh,
there's
good.
nothing to close.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'd like to hear from the other planning board members.
Danny, can I just
Yep.
offer? I, for one, having been chair of the board when the special permit application was filed and when it was reviewed and drafted, I do not have recollection of talking about visitors. And so I would be uncomfortable requiring language in the condo documents on a topic that was not discussed during that whole process. I understand the 55, that the residents will be 55, and I understand that this clarification about the house, the partnership, whether it's a spouse or otherwise, seems to be a warranted clarification. But on visitors, I just feel like that's once we get into that territory, what does that mean for any home owner in any other location? We're going to start to tell them who can visit them and who can't. And I wonder how exclusive we're trying to make this town. How exclusive are we trying to make the buyers who live in these homes? I'm really concerned about what kind of precedent it would set. And so I don't feel like we should be trying to expand what was discussed in the special permit. That was a very long process and we had lots of opportunity for comment. And we didn't talk about that. And so I'm not comfortable at requiring that kind of language.
I hear you, Cheryl. And I, I feel for everybody, even Jack Dolly, everybody in this room, because it is a tough topic. And I feel like feelings rose high. And I think that some people who, I'll just say the people representing Mr. Dolly who weren't here at the beginning of the process probably didn't understand. And I wanted to bring them up to date with some of the background. But having said that, one of the reasons we didn't talk about visitors or long-term guests is because there was a strong assumption based on all of the discussions that got us to the special permit that it would be 55 plus, period. So but you are right. Technically, you are right. We did not discuss visitors during the special permit. So there's nothing in the special permit about visitors. And that is why town council has said that they're compliant with the special permit. And the bylaw, we didn't get into visitors or guests or definition of occupants either. So we have very narrow jurisdiction. So while I agree with Mr. Chicello, the enforcement mechanism, $50 is completely lame. I would recommend tighter caregiver language. I think it's the good faith thing to do. I think changing the enforcement mechanism to $250 is the good faith thing to do. I think, you know how I feel about the college student issue.
And I will say, I don't recall seeing an email today with any provision of Mr. Chicello's suggested changes.
I'm sorry, I wasn't on my email today, so I'm not familiar with that either. But anyway, okay, so does anyone else want to speak to this before we take a vote?
Do you want me to? There's a hand up in the participants. I want to make sure
Okay.
that I'm being
Yep.
very careful about how we manage this.
That's right. I did not ask to speak from the public. I'd be happy to hear from the public. Please come forward.
Well, I mean, so it's Jack Dolly that has his hand up, and I feel
Okay.
like
Oh, no,
again
it's
I'm trying to
okay.
tread very carefully on this issue because I feel like I was called out a little bit earlier, and
No,
I just
that's
want to make
okay,
sure that
Tim.
everyone's very clear about kind of what we're doing and who we're hearing from.
That's fine. I'm happy to hear from you, Mr. Dolly. Mr. Dolly, are you on mute? Are you able to join us?
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say two things. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge what Mr. Bowler said and offer my apology to the board as a whole and to you as the chairman for the tone of voice and the directness that I spoke in. Yeah, it was a long process that we all, yourself included, and I and Tony went through, and therefore having to have this conversation tonight and the one 2 weeks ago, is as unsettling to me as apparently it is to Mr. Chicello and his clients. The characterization that around children and age restriction it was very clear in my mind that was had, the alternative that was offered by me being a subdivision, with single family homes and, conventional families with, young kids and lots of traffic generated, going to school and soccer games and so on and so forth, was contrasted with an alternative to an age targeted community or an age restricted community, of which I have done, more than two hands worth of, in excess of 1,000 units, and one of which is 2 miles away, which is not an age restricted community. It's an age targeted by design community, and we don't have problems with Milton High students. We don't have problems with returning college students. We don't have problems with 53-year-old wives or domestic spouses, and so it's a little challenging to have to talk about it as in the manner in which we are. So I would ask the board for their support of what Matt and Stephen have put forth. It is rational, it is reasoned, it is supportive and consistent with the representations that I believe that I made over a 3-year process to the town. I think it's more than fair, and I would also echo what Matt says. If we want to kill this project and make these units less marketable, which is not your role, but it is something that is could very well happen if there's an overreach here. So thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me make my comments. Again, I apologize for speaking loudly and strongly toward you, madam.
Well, thank you for your apology, and it has been a very long and hard process, and I would like to remember you by your product, which I think is excellent. I did take a tour, I was on a walk and I popped in and I saw the historic renovation of one of the houses closest to Canton Avenue, and I was quite impressed. And that is the way I prefer to remember this whole process. And I think tempers got high because we all really care, and we all really wanted the best outcome for this community, which includes the Walcott Estates now. So I thank you for your care and your diligence, and I'd like to turn it back to the board now.
Thank you.
Let's see. So would someone like to, I'd entertain a motion.
I would make a motion to approve the condominium documents submitted to us on Walcott Woods as amended.
Does anyone want a second? We have no second.
I'll make a second.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, I was muted trying to say second to myself.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I was wondering where you went. All right, so we have a second. So all in favor? Kathleen O'Donnell,
Yes.
Cheryl Tagayas,
Yes.
Rich Beeler,
Yes.
and Meredith Hall.
Yes.
Okay, Denny Swenson, yes. All right, so thank you, Mr. Dolly and team. Let's see, we're moving on to.
Thank you.
Thank you,
you.
Tony.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Tony, too.
Oh, yes, and Tony, thank you, Mr. Chicallo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Milton Village Design Guide, the proposals. so we have that, and then we have Wentworth Farm landscape plans. So here, how are we doing? We're at 10:19. I think we have to power through these. I'll go first if that's okay. I read all three and I was absolutely thrilled with Dodson Flinker. I thought their materials were impressive. They had me at the village guidance manual, tools and techniques. You know, they're just incredible about village creation and revitalization case studies. They've just really studied how to make villages work. And just in comparison to the other two, that kind of had more of a little bit of an urban feel. I just thought their experience and knowledge and the incredible resources I found of things that they had written and put into place for other towns that just work really well. It got me actually really excited about the village. So I just wanted to say that I'm a huge fan now of Dodson Flinker, and I was up reading about zoning way too late at night, Kathleen. So about zoning and
You know, my boat's leaving the dock at
architects.
5 a.m. So
Okay,
I hope you appreciate this.
Okay, all right. So do you want to make any comments on the Milton Village Design Guideline proposals we received?
Well, actually, I agree with you. I thought Dodson Finkers was good.
Yay, Kathleen and I agreed. I am having a cocktail. Okay, let's go. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Well, I'll just say, I thought they're all highly qualified. What I would say about Dodson Flinkers, they worked with Judy Barrett in East Milton. So I feel like they already can probably hit the ground running a little bit. I mean, Milton Village is, I think, unique in that it's a different kind of character than East Milton, but I would have been happy with it, all three of them. So I'm happy to go with your suggestion.
Well, that's important because you were the most invested in the overlay. So that's great that we can actually agree. I'm going to have 2 cocktails tonight because I got Cheryl. So this is a good night. Okay, sorry, I don't usually drink, but anyway. Meredith, did you have any thoughts?
I completely agree. You know, as they rolled in, I liked each one of them. I thought they were all wonderful, but Dodson Flinker, I felt like I really liked their approach, their sensitivity, and they're very much wanting to bring the community and have involvement and hear from the development community, as well as, you know, what we are aiming for in our goals. And I thought they were just, you know, they do have experience in East Milton Square too, which is nice. And they really do, I think, really try to get to understand their community, and we are so unique. So that really stood out to me. So.
Excellent, excellent. Rich, did you want to weigh in on these proposals for the
No,
architect?
I don't have anything extra.
Okay, great. So Tim, what do you need from us? Do you need us to take a vote?
Yeah, so what I'll say is if you all have a choice, if you would vote to basically authorize me to engage in a contract, you know, for the quoted price, and authorize me to execute that contract on behalf of the planning board, that would be good. I'm glad that everyone liked all of the proposals. I thought they were all great as well. You know, I'm having this experience with another grant that we're kind of applying for, where, you know, you ask for these proposals from these firms and you kind of hope that they're all duds except for one, and they're not. They're all good, and you have to, you know, say goodbye to some otherwise really qualified and really exciting proposals. But you do have to pick, and so I appreciate it's a tough choice, but I'm glad that you all feel that, you know, there's one that rises to the top. So if you want to make that choice and vote to authorize me to engage in a contract and execute on behalf of the planning board, I think we'll be good to go. We'll want to get really cracking on this just so we get it done before the end of the fiscal year, which I think I'm confident that we can make that happen.
Excellent. So I will entertain a motion. Is Kathleen there? Because she does these the fastest. Does anyone want to make the motion that Tim just said?
I would just make a motion that we authorize Tim to engage in contract negotiations with Dodson Flinker on a contract to develop design standards for the Milton Village project.
So can I just add a friendly amendment? To
Yeah,
that
knock
should
yourself out.
be design guidelines because the standards are already in the zoning.
Oh, sorry.
Great. Okay, does anyone want to second the motion?
Second,
All in favor, Kathleen O'Donnell,
Yes.
Cheryl Tagayas,
yes.
Meredith Hall,
Yes.
Rich Beeler,
Yes.
Denny Swenson, yes. Okay, so now we have a report on 23 Wentworth Farm landscape plans. Okay, Tim, did you want to just bring us up to speed?
Yeah, I'm just sending myself an email to
Oh,
do this
good.
tomorrow. So it's my to-do list is how that works.
That's good. Thank you.
So just by way of background, and I may have, I think I sent an email that kind of functions as my report. The special permit for Wentworth Farm Road, which is a cluster development, has a requirement for lots 2 through 5 to submit a landscape plan for essentially the area between the back of the footprint of the house and the property line with Ford Ranch Road. During the course of those, that special permit discussion, there was a lot of sensitivity towards the direct abutters on Ford Ranch Road, and we wanted to make sure that the landscaping, there's a 10-foot buffer zone, which in some cases was designed to remain in a vegetated natural state, and in other cases was designed to be landscaped, depending on the lot. And as a kind of further measure, the planning board wanted some additional kind of sign off on the landscaping plan in the yard itself, just to make sure that it was consistent with that part of the neighborhood and kind of consistent with other lots. And so and this is all needs to be done prior to the issuance of a building permit. So for lot, I think it's lot 5, the address is 23 Ford Ranch Road. The building commissioner notified me that he got an application for a building permit, and I informed the owner there about this requirement. And so we've been going back and forth a little bit, not too much back and forth, just me telling him what he needs to do and then him doing it. It's been a really nice process. So I sent to you all a landscape plan that includes both the backyard and the 10-foot buffer zone. The 10-foot buffer zone does have additional plantings, which the special permit basically says if you're going to do additional plantings in the sort of natural vegetated zone, that you need to get sign off from your neighbor, which he has, Mr. Argus, who's the applicant here. I believe I sent an email to everyone, and if I didn't, I will send it to you, and I assure you that it exists. An email from the owner at 132 Ford Ranch Road, Mrs. McGrath, approving of the plan for the vegetated buffer zone in the 10 feet behind the house. So I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. Hopefully you all have had a chance to look at this. Not being a landscape architect, I don't think I'm asked to be a landscape architect in this regard. But these plantings all strike me as either kind of native plantings or typical for Milton. I think that the two main things in the special permit that they want us to look at is to make sure that the plantings don't interfere with the septic system. Again, this is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. It doesn't appear that there are any plantings that are on top of or even really in the kind of close vicinity of the septic field. But I have sent this to Carolyn Kinsella, who is the Director of Public Health, who has in turn sent it along to our septic consultant for confirmation that these plantings will not have any deleterious effect on the septic system. And then finally, the special permit asks that if there's any regrading that would kind of trigger the cut and fill bylaw, which we're also very familiar with these days, that basically if that happens, then they'll need to we'll have to flag that and they'll need a special permit under the auspices of that aspect of the bylaw. There is no regrading that's associated with this landscape plan. There is this wall What I've been told by the landscape architect is that this wall is actually consistent with the approved grading from the subdivision plan from the original approval, so that this wall doesn't have any new grading associated with it. It just sort of is there as a result of the approved grading. And so, taking all that into account, special permit requires me to issue a report, and it requires you to take a vote to approve or disapprove. You can consider this to be my report. I think this is an appropriate plan. I think it's consistent with the special permit, and I would recommend that the board vote to approve it.
Okay, and I understand that we did hear from the abutter closest to it. Is that correct? The McGraths are the closest to it?
Yes, so those are the abutters. It's not on this plan here, it's on other plans, but they're at Ford Ranch Road, 132, back here.
And it's a dead end, I believe. So I think they are the very last house and.
Yeah, so they're the
Okay.
last house. They own this and like a jillion acres, like out to the golf course back here. And so a pretty enthusiastic message from Mrs. McGrath about this.
Yeah, so that was good to hear. All right, did anyone else have any questions? Do we have anyone from the public? I would hope not at 10:30. Okay, anyone on the planning board want to speak to this? Questions, comments?
Denny, can I just make a comment? It's more about the development itself.
Mhm.
I don't have any particular concerns about the plan. I do remember discussions and how there was a concern by these neighbors about, the treescape. I did drive through here not too long ago. And it's another one of these where my heart sinks at how much it's changed for those neighbors, their backyards on Ford Ranch Road neighbors. It's just these buffers, that we think might be adequate just turn out to be inadequate. And I just want to mention it because, it's not the first one where I found these, even if you go to Countryside Lane and you look towards the Pulte, I guess when it's defoliated and, when it's winter time, you see these things more so. But when you have these topographic changes and you have these houses that are pretty big and they're kind of looming over, and you have it here too, where these houses are higher than the Ford Ranch Road houses. And so, the treescape makes a big difference when you have such a scale difference like that. So anyway, it's just, as we look at these subdivisions, it's good for us to go back later and kind of just go through them and see what we think we can improve on. So that's just a comment, but I have no particular problem, especially if the neighbor's happy with this landscape plan.
Okay, yeah, I remember that too. It was one of my first projects. So I will take a spin through. Yeah, that was kind of unfortunate. Thank you for keeping me posted. Okay, does anyone else want to speak to this plan before we take a vote?
I think it looked good.
Okay, great. Okay, Meredith, thank you. Kathleen, Rich, any thoughts?
Nope.
Okay, great.
Nope.
Nope, okay. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Danny, can I just chime in real quick and just
yeah.
ask that the motion be conditioned on a satisfactory report from the Director of Public Health?
Thank you. That's perfect. And do we need anyone else? Joe Prondak's good. Everybody's good. It's not a shade tree issue. Okay. All right. So public health. All right. Anyone want to make that motion?
So the motion is to approve. Do we have to approve it, or is Tim actually, do we accept Tim's report? Is that what's the?
That's a good question. Tim?
Let me bring up my email because it has the
I think you
It
said
has
approve
the-
the plan.
the town planner shall review the plan and shall issue a report to the planning board, which within 60 days shall approve the plan, providing that the landscaping does not change the topography, all the things I explained. So yeah, it's approved the plan.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to, I'm sorry, what was the address that we have for that?
23 Wentworth Farm Road.
That I'll make a motion to approve the landscaping plan for 23 Wentworth Road, based upon the favorable report of the Director of Planning and Community Development.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Conditioned on a favorable report from the Director of Public Health regarding the septic field.
Thank you, Tim.
So
It's
as
only
amended.
2 minutes before that you said that.
As amended, no, it's getting late. Okay, so I'm glad you thought of that again. Okay, so we have a motion, a second, all in favor, Kathleen O'Donnell,
Yes.
Cheryl Tagayas,
Yes.
Meredith Hall,
Yes. Rich
Beeler,
Yes.
Denny Swenson, yes. Okay, all right. So because Kathleen's on a ship, the only thing left is a discussion on fall town meetings, which we do have to get to, and I'm hoping we can do that next time. Will Kathleen be off a ship in 2 weeks?
Well, my boat, yes.
Good, boat, I'm sorry, your boat. Okay, all right.
Your
I'll take
email's still up. Tim,
Okay,
sorry.
oh yeah, Tim. close
Tim, your email is still up.
Oh,
Close your
yeah.
email.
All right. Hey,
okay.
these are public documents, people.
know.
That's,
Oh, good, that's it.
No, I just didn't know. if you
whatever. Meredith,
Okay,
I have literally nothing to hide.
I know.
All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Denny, can I just chime in real quick? I know I kind of dispensed with the staff report earlier, but I just wanted to give the board just a quick, so you had sent along some edits to additional edits to the cut and fill bylaw.
Tree one,
That's in the folder right now. I actually haven't had a chance to look at those, but let's talk about those. And I know Kathleen is working on ADUs based on feedback that we've gotten. I think we should make a good faith effort to try to get to those and perhaps other issues that the planning board wants to address. We've been getting a lot of applications for things, 440 granite notwithstanding, some smaller kind of scenic road things. We do have another site plan approval coming up for I'm hoping that this is a relatively small one, but who knows, for another daycare. This is an existing family daycare on Big Blue Drive, family daycare being kind of inside the house. And it's basically the owners of that house and the operators of that business are trying to move from inside the house to their garage. And so there's going to be renovations to the garage and moving the business from inside the house to the garage. No expansion of the business, but just the change in location kind of triggers a building code definition change that in turn triggers site plan approval. So we'll get all of those kind of factors lined up for you so everyone understands exactly what's going on. But we did review it and we did a technical review. It's a relatively straightforward and simple operation, but that will be subject to a public hearing. So we'll be advertising that next week and getting those abutters notices out. So that's but I think that's the only other thing on the agenda besides whatever else you all want to talk about. So we've got 440 and then we'll have that.
Can I just make a request, Denny, relative to zoning in the upcoming meeting? I think I asked at one of our recent meetings if we could at least map out a schedule of what the annual town meeting, when the warrant closes, when we would need to look at zoning. Because I would like for us to talk about next steps out of the Barrett planning report in East Milton and whether we should try and target any kind of overlay district for next May and whether we have time for that. It's something where, when Falcones were first proposing a building there and many neighbors asked the planning board to take a leadership role in planning, we did the ULI TAP and then we hired Barrett Planning. So I just don't want things to kind of feel like we plan and then we don't have an outcome, So anyway, that's just my request to kind of at least map out whether that's the right time frame.
I think that would be a good idea to map out timeframes. I think one thing we have to we're just getting so many applications, and they're very involved applications. I mean, this memory clinic, and he wants it in 3 meetings. I mean, it's getting a little bit crazy. So yeah, we have to take a good hard look at everything.
So Denny, one other thing that I wanted to bring up for the board, and it may be related or can be part of this conversation, is, and I've mentioned this in previous meetings, the state of emergency for the public health emergency ends on the 15th next week, which there are provisions of that state of emergency that kind of suspend certain, you make the little announcement at the beginning of every meeting. Provisions of the open meeting law that allow us to meet remotely will go away unless there's a legislative change, between now and 5 days from now. So I am assuming that our next meeting is going to be back at home in the basement of town hall in the Carol Blute room. So let's, I have to actually assume that because I have to advertise a public hearing. So that's kind of how it's going to be. But depending on the legislative fix or not, if we're, in the future allowed to do, and this is just a thought that I had that the board may want to kind of, chew on for a little bit, for things like these conversations about basically, I don't want to say internal board conversations because the board does public business, but things that don't involve applications or kind of outside kind of things, things that are really about tactical, strategic kind of, practices of the board. We may be able to be in a situation if we're allowed to meet remotely in some ways, it may make sense to, every second and fourth Thursday, we have a planning board meeting. It's a little bit easier to have these conversations on Zoom when you're not kind of administering a public hearing. I think the board can, so there may be an opportunity to do kind of supplemental board meetings that are kind of internal board business type things remotely if we're allowed to do that. It may just be something to think about. I've been thinking about it quite a bit. It seems very difficult to do all this, and to talk about extra meetings. But I think if we're kind of like thinking about the business of the board of like public facing kind of, in-person stuff versus stuff that kind of gets pushed to the back of the agenda, at 10:42 at night. We can all be at home, in our beds or kitchen tables or whatever, talking zoning, and having productive conversations. So just something to think about. We don't have to talk about it right now, and it may not even be something we can do, but I just wanted to kind of put it out there. And that said, I've got nothing else for the night. So.
Okay, well, thank you. That's interesting. I've been thinking about it too, so I'm glad you brought it up. All right, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
That was good. That was the first thing you said. Except for you helped Tim earlier, I recall. Okay, anyone besides Allison?
Second.
Okay. I do need somebody to make the motion first. Though, 'cause that
Like the motion to adjourn.
Okay, Cheryl and Meredith seconds, and Rich. Okay, all in favor, Rich Beeler,
Yes.
Meredith Hall,
Yes.
Cheryl Tagayas,
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell. Have a great trip.
Thanks.
And Denny
Yes.
Swin- yes. Bye, everyone.
Good
Enjoy
night.
those 2 cocktails, Denny.
Okay, I'm gonna go get them right now. Good night.
Good night.